I'll now call the April 22nd, 2026 Special Planning Commission meeting to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner McPhail.
Present.
Vice Chair Mead. Here. Chair Lee.
Present.
Vice Chair Malakoff.
Present.
Commissioner Malakoff.
Present.
Commissioner Bedard.
Here.
Let the record show all commissioners are present.
Thank you. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. No, we don't have a.
They face out that way.
That way. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Agenda finalization. Are there any changes to our agenda?
There are no changes, Chair.
Thank you. To item 1, public comments. I don't believe there are any members of the public present. Do we have any comments submitted?
We don't, but I can just read the statement of participation really quick.
Necessary.
No? Okay.
Okay. Item 2, non-public hearing items. Item A, presentation and discussion of the Objective Design Standards Division 3 of the Development Code update. May we have staff report?
Certainly. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for being here early this evening to accommodate the special meeting. And welcome to the last section of the review of the initial Development Code update. These are the objective design standards. They have generated a lot of discussion. I want to provide just some basic context tonight before I turn it over to our consultants for the presentation and discussion. So we have heard your concerns on Division 3 and the objective design standards. The team is actively working to reorganize the section to address the concerns and comments, and that material is in process of being reorganized. A significant amount of work is underway to reshape that division. And what we really want to do is focus our conversation and comments tonight on top priorities for the elements that will appear in the objective design standards. So the top priorities for this really are to try to make the standards measurable and objective, and to remove stylistic references, recognize that that section will be reorganized to reflect your preferences and requests for what should we include and what should we not include. Stylistic references meaning things like, and there was a lot of conversation about breeze blocks and how breeze blocks function or do not function. And maybe we just don't cite breeze blocks and we just talk about how to articulate an entryway. So anyway, with all that said, I will turn it over to the consultants this evening. Thank you again for being here, and Dwight.
Well, good afternoon. This is fun. An afternoon study session. I like those, a little different. Well, it's a pleasure to be here again. As Cynthia mentioned, this is kind of our last of our initial study sessions where we're looking at the draft code before we actually start rolling it out for public review and consumption. As with the other portions of this code update, we've done it in pieces, done it in phases to hopefully just make this as presentable as possible to you and break up these bits in chunks. We find that's a lot easier for review. It gives you kind of better opportunities to focus on the tasks at hand. This project was a development code update, but it also involved just more than that. It's also a subdivision code update and the introduction of this new tool called Objective Design Standards, which was something that the city currently doesn't have from a design aspect, but something that was wanting to be folded into this overall development code update. So today, what I want to do is go over the draft for you, some of the existing standards that we proposed, talk about what we've heard so far from the steering committee. As Cynthia mentioned, there are already some shifts happening to the overall structure of what's in front of you. What we hope to do today, though, is take a look at the actual standards and the content within there, knowing that we will be reorganizing and shifting and adding more graphics. What we hope to get at today, though, is to talk about the standards specifically, what are the potential outcomes, and flesh that out as a team and answer any questions so that when we go back to the drawing board and we're reorganizing that, we can take all of your comments collectively and fold it in all at the same time. We have some questions that we are looking to go over with you, similar to our other study sessions, but I'll just provide an overview, at least of the draft standards that we have for you first. So similar to your development standards, which I'm sure the Planning Commission is familiar with, setbacks, height, typically the way that jurisdictions previously would guide development or the design and architectural development was through guidelines, architectural or design guidelines, and it's probably a term that you've heard or another tool that you've heard frequently. Well, as best practices is shifting, and as state of California becomes more of a heavy-handed state when it comes to land use law and compliance with kind of what are the regulatory controls that jurisdictions can have over development, the state and jurisdictions are really starting to shift away from this design guideline. And design guidelines really because the guidelines are subjective in nature. The guidelines, if you can think about examples, often will call for coulds and shoulds and not really shalls and hard language. And what that ends up doing on the back end is it slows down some projects during discretionary review in some instances. So the idea is that to create more certainty for the public, to create more certainty for planning commissioners and developers is to create a base minimum set of design standards that aren't subjective, but are rather objective. And this is to kind of set you up for success with industry best practice. This is what developers are wanting. They want to know what they can expect from the city if they crack open at least your minimum design standards. And it's really end up being a mandate by the state in some cases. There are certain groups of projects, without getting too technical, that are mandated to be streamlined, specifically some residential projects. And the state has said that if jurisdictions don't have objective design standards, then essentially developers can propose whatever they want in some instances. So through this process, what we hope to do is, if there are projects that qualify for those streamlined standards, having these base minimums as a foundation will at least create some certainty for you when those qualifying streamlined projects do come in. You have a reasonable expectation of what those may look like, and it provides the developers an understanding of what their expectations are for design. So these objective design standards are new. They've been shaped out of our best practice, out of the study sessions and feedback that we've heard from council and commission, and also a lot of the engagement that was conducted at the outset of this project. We did our city tours, we looked at neighborhoods, went to commercial centers. Many of you attended those walking tours with us. And then we looked at some of the unique aspects of living in the Coachella Valley, and especially in a high desert environment, and tried to really compile all of those into a single set of standards that were overarching enough, not too prescriptive, but provided a good foundation. So what do objective standards do? And I think kind of what more importantly is what I'll, to the slide after this, is what they don't do. But the idea is that these are to provide a minimum set of standards for 3 types of development, at least in this tool that we're developing. The idea is that we would develop minimum design standards for your multifamily projects, for new mixed use projects, and then commercial projects. So the standards that we have kind of address those 3 typologies, land use typologies. The idea is to provide flexibility. So in here, you'll see as the draft standards, they're not overly prescriptive in the sense that it is mandating a specific standard. Rather, we've taken the idea of offering a couple of options for developers to pick as they go through this list of design standards. Create flexibility, but also create that certainty on your end because you know what the potential outcomes might be from the options selected. And the idea here is also to ensure transparency. We want developers to know that this is that you are requiring high quality design, that is going to be a minimum base standard, but it also helps set expectations for the public when projects are coming in, that they understand, at least from the base minimum, what the city is requiring.
And then really it's for those ministerial projects that don't have any discretionary review. So the community is aware, looking at the objective standards, that this is the base minimum that a project will have to incorporate. It's not an unknown, because a lot of these streamlined projects are not going to go before planning commission, not going to go before council. They'll just go straight to a building permit if they meet everything in here. So the transparency goes beyond commission and staff and a developer. It's really a tool for the public as well, because they will not be notified of such projects that are streamlined coming in. Yes.
Point of order, how do you want us to? When we have questions. Want to structure that?
I have a couple more slides. I think what I want to do is kind of paint a better picture of kind of maybe some of the outcomes of these standards. It may answer some questions. And then I have some 3 guided questions. At that point, I can hand it back to the commission if there are follow-ups before we get into the actual.
Here's how you wanted to do it.
Yeah, I have just a couple more informational slides, and then I think we can open it up to discussion if that works. So what these standards aren't intended to do is to prescribe specific architectural styles. So we're not looking in these standards, or at least it wasn't the desire to specify modern architecture or Spanish revival or craftsman. The idea is to provide base set of standards for massing, articulation, site placement, more site and massing architectural design, as opposed to finite architectural features and defining a particular style. We want to create that flexibility here. The idea is also to, again, as I had mentioned, to not prescribe standards. It's a very narrow in scope. We aren't looking to prescribe standards here in this case to single family development or industrial style development. Really only that mixed use, that multifamily, and the commercial typologies. So what does objective design standards really cover? As I mentioned, you already have development standards, setbacks, height, lot coverage. But design standards really focus on, well, the design aspects of these. And for some of these topics, you may already go, well, don't we already have some of these standards? Yes, these are additional standards, or these are crafted additional standards that we have put in here to help augment, to help better certain aspects of some problem areas that we've heard. So potentially parking, shade considerations, building articulation, really of the structures themselves. And here's just kind of what I want to walk us through some illustrative examples of kind of what this language could actually look like. So I think we're all familiar with this building. We had our first workshop here, and then we took a tour of this as part of our walking tour. And what I want to do is I've overlaid some of the objective standards that we've crafted just to kind of highlight some of the things that we're calling for that a lot of development already comes in with, but we would just be now prescribing as a minimum base standard. So for example, when it comes to multifamily development, like the senior center, we have standards in here that call for entryway connections, recessed windows, pedestrian access, kind of modulation. And what that really ends up translating to is design features and design expectations that you're already kind of familiar with, that we've had to emulate as a base minimum into just your normal operating standards. So we, as opposed to specifying, too specifically how much access or the distances, we're instead calling for kind of more generic connections to pedestrian pathways, not trying to be too prescriptive, but provide enough guidance and objective enough where yourself and your city staff can make these going through the design aspect of projects. Another example of how objective design standards are used is when we overlay it in other traditional multifamily style developments and typologies. In here, we've created standards about horizontal articulation. What are the minimum widths of the buildings and separation for sidewalks, requirements for recessed windows, all with the intent of not prescribing a specific architectural style, but to instead provide good best practices for design that can be applied into a multitude of different development types. Other examples include community entry features. As I had mentioned, we've kind of built in this optional language and optional standards for developers or applicants to pick from, in which case the example would be we have for our commercial typologies and commercial development a requirement for commercial entry features. And in this standard, we list a series of 7 different options that developers can almost pick as part of their application, whether that's the introduction of an arcade or the placement of breeze blocks, or having connection to outdoor dining and seating. And the idea is that a developer can pick one of these aspects and not necessarily be locked into one, creates that flexibility. But we also create that certainty of here are the 7 standards that the city is comfortable with selecting and can articulate those well within the standards. Really, it then ends up becoming up to the developer to select what option is going to best fit within the program that they're trying to design. And here's just another illustrative example. This should look somewhat familiar. I think this draft or these graphics were provided to the commission as examples of some other work that we've done. This is pulled from the city of San Ramon. We did objective design standards for, and we introduced at least a graphic style where we kind of replicated those same examples, but we overlaid the standards on pictures. Again, not trying to call out a particular style, but just show how these standards could be and what they would turn into in real life kind of development scenarios. So we presented these standards in a little bit of a slightly different draft than what you have before you today to the steering committee. We received a lot of great feedback to the structure, some content considerations, and as part of that process now we're before the Planning Commission. So what we want to do is to go over some of the similar questions that we've provided to steering committee, provide you the feedback the steering committee gave us, and then also solicit and take additional feedback and content on the draft standards. As Cynthia had mentioned, really our topic and the point of this evening is to get your comfortability and your understanding of the organizational change that we plan on making. We also want to get your feedback on the standards and the clarity of them and whether or not we need to add additional topic areas. And then we also want to see if there are elements of this that we can improve to better meet your expectations for your desired outcomes for this project. So kind of a lot to cover, but I know, Rich, it sounded like you had some questions, and maybe before we get into these specific guided questions, I can hand it back to the Planning Commission.
Sure, Chair.
No, you, Chair. You're going to go first. You said you had some questions.
Okay. My first question, I guess, is I've read the legislation a number of times and I understand what the objective development standards are for, but if you do a 500 unit apartment complex, you just can't say that there's no environmental impact. So how is CEQA going to relate to the use of the objective design standards? I mean, are you still going to be able to do a mitigated negative deck or an EIR if needed?
Yes. Yeah, so it's just talking about the ministerial process and the review for what discretionary permits the city can and entitlements the city can require. So CEQA would still apply, building code, environmental considerations would all still apply on the site. If it was a qualifying project, though, the city might not be able to require a conditional use permit per se.
So if it's a project that's large enough and has environmental impacts, the commission and the council might still see it. If it's a mitigated negative deck, the commission could approve it. And if it's an environmental impact report, it would have to go to the commission and the council.
I know the city attorney looked at.
Right, because as it stands, some just have it outright where CEQA they will qualify for an exemption because they are making it ministerial. So as part of the consideration, it will be that, hey, if we can make this project fit within the parameters of this specific legislation, whatever that would be, we would analyze how they are interpreting CEQA. If, the impacts are too great, then there's no other way for an MND or any other CEQA analysis to be adopted without going to first Planning Commission and council.
So that's a way that we might see some of these projects, which I think gives me a little bit more comfort. Some of the things that I think we should include are in Palmdale and Palm Desert, they have introductions and goals and objectives. I think that really puts everything right out there, what the city wants to be, what their expectations are. So I think that would be a good thing for us to have. You already said you're going to do graphics, but the kind of graphics that your firm did for figure 2 in San Ramon. I thought that was just really great. And Commissioner Bedard would like it's a shade graphic. And it was very well done. And it's where a picture says 1,000 words. In Palmdale, there was also a flow chart for the process, and I never saw a process of where projects go for us and if they can be appealed and who they're appealed to. So in Palmdale, they had a really great, simple flow chart that showed it gets submitted, it gets determined complete, it goes to the director, and then it can be appealed at different stages. So I think that would also be something good for us to have. And then related to that process, also define what substantive changes are. In the multiple family, I thought that some of the things that we might want to include are shade tree requirements, minimum distance or, a distance between every door, open to sky requirements and different kinds of roofs. I also, I don't know that we have the market for townhomes now, but we might want to include that because we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. And I think when the average person looks at an objective design standard, so let's just use Palmdale as an example. It's like, you're kidding. They're not going to build that in Palmdale. But we really don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. And I think that they addressed that really well. And San Ramon did too. Because I don't think that they're going to have, right now, they don't have high scale development. So I think we need to think about that. The checklist that both Palm Desert and Palmdale have, not only is a good tool for the developers to see, but it's a good tool for the planners to have. And I actually used the Palm Desert checklist, and I thought it made my job a lot easier. You had definitions in San Ramon that were really good. And I don't know if that's duplicative of what definitions will be elsewhere, but I thought that was a really good place to have them. I think that we really need to call out the different types of housing. The townhomes, the triplex, the quadplex, the sixplex. And we didn't include single family developments, but I thought about it and I'm not sure that they would be relevant because technically a map doesn't come with objective development standards. But I think you're supposed to get a design review if it has more than 4 units. I mean, four homes. So I didn't see anything for single family homes either. You call out murals, which I think is really great for commercial, but I don't think murals really belong in residential. I don't see a need for them there. The lighting standards I think should be more specific and have photometric levels, types of lighting that are preferred, and the impacts on adjacent residential, how to buffer the adjacent residential. Whether you use collars in the lighting fixture to prevent there to be backflow of lighting into the residential, or that it's focused downward, or what the height should be adjacent to residential. Also, one of the first things people see on residential is the entry monumentation. See anything about that? So we should have something about, because that's going to really define the project. Also, something that when I was in Redlands, they had a specific plan that had primary corridors, secondary corridors, and then they had primary intersections and secondary intersections, and they defined what the expectation of the landscaping was there. I don't know if we can be that specific, but I think that we can put in to have an expectation that, you know, a corner of two major corridors should have enhanced landscaping. Going back to the process, when somebody has something, I guess I don't want creativity to be stifled. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but if somebody doesn't fit into the standards, they shouldn't be punished for coming up with something that's creative. If somebody does something that's cheap and doesn't look good, that's a different story, but I don't know how, you know, it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I don't know how to distinguish between the two different situations, but I don't want to stifle somebody that comes up with something that we didn't consider. So creativity needs to be rewarded. In mixed use, I think that I think it was more looking at horizontal mixed use. And again, I don't know if it's ever going to become relevant out here. I know that the vice chair probably has a lot of experience with this in LA because you have vertical mixed use there, but we haven't really had too much of that here, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. So I think we should have standards for that. It's done. For commercial, I gave comments on commercial, but I just don't think we're ready for that. I think that we should do mixed use and residential and do commercial at another time. You know, and I don't know how that affects the budget or anything like that, but I just think that's a lot to bite off into this one thing that we're doing. But you know, that might have more political considerations than anything else. But I just thought I would mention that. I already said that. The other thing that both residential and commercial should address are bus shelters. And so like the bus shelters I won't say what city they're bad in, but some cities where they're just like, they don't even have a bus shelter, they just have a naked bench. And then they have other cities where they're very elaborate. I think Palm Deserts are the most elaborate. Rancho Mirage they're all covered. I don't know that they look as good as Palm Deserts, but they're all covered. So I think that's something that we should address so that people just don't sit in the open sun. And my last comment is one of my favorite things is that large-scale residential development should be thought of as a village. And have things like daycare, have things that people would need that they could walk to. And I think that's the direction that a lot of development is going. In some places, it's more intense than it is in others, but I think that's something that we should strive for. And that's it. Thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Okay, next.
We didn't get the framing that you've just put before us in advance of this meeting. We in the past, we've received questions to focus on, and we didn't get that this time. So I went in a different direction, maybe from where we are right now. So I'm assuming we'll maybe get some more slides going into certain parts of the objective design standard text. I thought maybe I'll just start with some just very general top line comments as it hit me, not having the advantage of being on the steering committee and hearing some of the discussions that went on there, but I read their points. And you know, I came in and I was sort of joking before the meeting began. I said, you know, what Palm Desert did, end of story, goodbye. And I kind of mean it in a way, because when I looked at that document as an example, if we are talking about formatting, and I know you're going to be doing formatting and other things, but the way this was laid out, as Commissioner Malakoff said, early on in their document, you know, they had goals and objectives, like 7 goals and objectives that seemed very reasonable and applicable to me. And I think that framing is a really good way to start. And I guess in terms of the question that you have right now, something that struck me, and I remember Ms. Schultz talking about this earlier on, this issue of a separate document versus somehow lacing this into the code. The way I saw the Palm Desert document, I thought that was a very easy and accessible way to go, and that appealed to me greatly. In the text, the draft text that we saw for the mixed use, multifamily and commercial, is that right? And I know it will look better in the final product. It was just very repetitive, and it's quite difficult to follow all the different categories. Like, you've got 9.00, 0.030, point A, point 2.B.I, and it's really hard to, which section am I in now? Whereas the Palm Desert document was very clear. Section 3, architectural standards, or whatever it was. And there'd be a few paragraphs. And again, as Commissioner Malikoff said, a picture paints 1,000 words, tables, short paragraphs. The standards are there. It's a lot easier to read than the nested subsections that we have right now. So that's a general formatting question of mine or comment of mine. I don't know how far to go before we see other things. I guess I'll just hit one or 2 points. I think the steering committee, and these may not be relevant anymore if you're redesigning things, but there was a comment on the steering committee that our draft does not include architectural standards. And the Palm Desert one did have a section on that, which referred to some of the things you were actually talking about. And they seemed reasonable to me. Is that something that we don't want to go? And I guess a question I would have for staff maybe, and a consultant, but mainly staff. From your reading of, for example, the Palm Desert document, do you have a concern that that's overly prescriptive in the detail that they give, or to development, or is that a reasonable approach that they took to their standards?
Yeah, so let me see if I can try to address. I think I want to try to address the questions that you were talking about in terms of the formatting. And I'm going to refer back to Division 3, and I'm going to look at our consultants, because that wasn't that long ago that we had the discussion on Division 3. So if you remember Division 3, and some of the topics that were covered in there included things like landscaping, parking, screening mechanisms. There was some discussion, and Brent, I don't know if you are prepared to talk about the proposed reformatting. I think if you can visualize how the document will be reformatted, it'll help you sort of visualize how this will go when it's revised. It won't be like Palm Desert in the sense that you won't be able to compare the two documents. They won't look the same. But I think in terms of organizational and structure, it will be. So what the proposal is to reorganize Division 3 so that all of the standards that can be objective are made into objective standards. What that means is they'll be broken down by type, mixed use, multifamily, commercial, and then citywide standards as well. So anything that needs a citywide standard, for example, parking spaces, whether you're mixed use or commercial, the standards are going to be essentially the same. The parking space is not going to change size based on, but architectural treatments will be different for those. So architecture is an element. So when we're talking about elements, we're looking at things like architectural things like facade articulation, the openings, the patterns of the windows and doors on a building, how the use of color is applied. Does that mean there can be a minimum of 2 colors and a maximum of 4? Those are the elements that we're talking about.
Right.
And they're sort of separated into 2 main categories when it comes to elements. Elements either fall under kind of an architectural design, or they fall under a site design, a site development standard, things like landscaping, how the layout of the parking is, the access, the driveways, the pedestrian routes, all that sort of thing. And then all of the street features, anything that gets built onto that site falls under sort of the architectural. So there's 2 breakdowns for every type of development that can occur. So I think that's why this is difficult, right? Because it's very conceptual at this point. And I'm asking you to do a lot of faith work in here and jump from what you're seeing. but those elements will be approximately the same. But of the Palmdale and Palm Desert, with the elements that were in those, essentially in the table of contents on both of those documents, of those elements, what is important to our city to include? And then I'm also encouraging you at that same time to try to take out any of this, because some of those did kind of veer off into what I would call design guidelines, where they're talking about things like tiled roofs or certain features that evoke an architectural style that we're trying not to
Why
prescribe.
are we trying not to do that?
Because, well, first of all, it's not objective.
Well, it is if they give you a list of I mean, there was nothing in there in the Palm Desert one that I saw that was subjective. They would say, you can choose 4 of these 7 things.
And they,
Those are objective things and the developer can choose 4 they want, like you were saying, how we were giving people a menu of options. To me, they took what would be a subjective discussion that something like the planning commission might have, like we like these kind of roofs or whatever, and they codified them and made them objective. Once you put them down on a piece of paper and say, you need to do this, that's objective now. It's no longer up to someone's interpretation. So I actually felt like they did a great job of going back to what you guys were saying at the beginning, the security that we want the public and the staff and everyone to feel about knowing what we're going to get. That's only going to happen if we are specific in these standards. And I think that's where I felt like Palm Desert did a great job of saying, what are the things that if we're going to get rid of planning commission and we're going to get rid of public input, what are the things we would hear during that process? And then they put them down as objective standards. And I feel like that's what we're missing.
and that's a conversation for us to have, but I think in the emails that we were just bantering back and forth today, and this is why I bring up the Breeze Block conversation. Breeze Block has a very specific and very limited application of what's appropriate. And I think you may have actually included a photograph that I probably used in my.
Did use earlier.
Yeah, but it was.
For example of a breeze block was the one that you guys used.
And I said, in mid-century modern architecture, things that were being built 50, 60, 70, whatever years ago now, I don't want to date myself here, but in those applications, it made total sense. But to put it down, I don't know that this planning commission has seen a project that has pulled off Breeze Block appropriately. And I think if you put that out there and say, the Grove Apartments, right? Pick Breeze Block. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So
Right.
leave it generic enough that it's not going
To be
into.
one of a number of
Yeah.
options.
But I
Have
think
to
what
do.
you're arguing is that because breeze blocks are an example of something that doesn't work here, we shouldn't have any point of view. And what I'm saying is maybe breeze blocks are not appropriate, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a point of view on other things.
Yes,
right?
I
So,
think we're on the same page.
yeah, so I think we're just looking at it from 2. You're saying just be broad because otherwise we're gonna end up with breeze blocks. I'm saying let's just not have breeze blocks, but
Yes.
we can have something else.
Yeah, and I think that's true. But when it comes to something like, can you imagine a building with a Spanish tile roof and breeze blocks? It doesn't, when you pick off of a menu and you say, well, I want the salad and the french fries. Okay, that's me. But if I try to do that, it might not come off well in execution. And that's the concern. I want to make sure that we're not trying to dictate a style.
But once we, just so people understand the context of how the breeze walk came up, is I didn't know what one was. And I sent an email to the vice chair and to Cynthia. And that led to a more fruitful discussion about how to use them both horizontally and vertically. And I think though that it still should be an option because like in the Cove,
We
I
had
can
that
see that
example.
as a standard. In Panorama, maybe not, but it should still be something that we're open to using. And for the horizontal breeze walk, could you go back to the one where you showed that was a vertical breeze? That one. So that may not fit Cathedral City per se, but you could have a doorway with a solid wall. And then it's called a foyer. So that's something just to think about. And it was a very good discussion. And thank you to you both for all the information that went back and forth.
Commissioner McPhail.
I might just,
I'd like to continue
Yeah.
that conversation, if I may. I didn't get to. Yeah. So I'm a little concerned about dictating architectural styles because we don't know what our next mid-century modern is going to be. We don't know what our next Victorian, Spanish, whatever is going to be. So that limits the trend, the design, the development. It limits, like Rich said, the creativity. And so that concerns me an awful lot. Like I put 10 murals in the city inventory of Los Angeles. And those murals were all done in single family residential neighborhoods. So like I'm concerned with the ideas of this limitation and boxing us in and that type of thing. I know it's easy. I know it's controllable. I know it creates conformity or uniformity, but I'm very concerned with our city growing, expanding, becoming something even more amazing if we are saying, oh, it can only look like this. So I just take exception to that. No offense to any of it, but we did go through a whole period where we were presented with different design materials that could be used in the city, which then would also dictate different design structures. And it seemed like everybody that was a unanimous, like, oh, isn't that cool? Right? A hay bale house or a super adobe house or and some other time, I'm not getting my head, but those types of structures are not going to have a tile roof, or maybe they're not going to have a particular type of roof that we even know of now. And we did go through all that work to get building materials approved. As long as it meets code, you can come and do this, and we welcome you to do this.
So
I remember that was one of the,
Just wanted to touch base on that.
just a second. So, but question for staff, but my understanding is if somebody wants to build something unique and different, then they're just out of the process of
discretionary.
this type of objective design, and they would go through a different process.
So if there's I think two topics that came out of that mentioned from Commissioner Bedard when he's talking about things like a straw bale home, that's usually a single family residence. And true, we don't have design standards for those. Currently, we're working on doing very minimal design standards for single family, but that's a separate discussion. But when it comes to something that's multifamily and that gets kicked into that multifamily, if someone was proposing, one of the examples I think that Director Molina had in her presentation was and I might be getting confused here, but I think there was a representation of a multifamily that was an alternative building style. When it comes through, we also have an alternate route or an alternate pathway. So there's an off-ramp for anything that doesn't, for one reason or another, cannot meet the objective design standard. Say the spire of a church or something that exceeds the height limit. That would have an off-ramp, and the state encouraged us to make those off-ramps so that a project like that would come to the planning.
Sure.
The creativity has to go through a longer process, and somebody that just does something that's blah and barely meets the objective design standards gets to breeze through the process quickly. It just doesn't seem fair that second person, should be on less of a standard than the first person who wants to do something creative and that will really benefit the city is going to have to go through a longer process.
And if I can jump in here real quick, if that's okay. The reason why the creativity goes beyond is because otherwise you would have to have objective standards trying to foresee what that creativity would be, which is endless. And so that's where the state goes. If you want to do something creative, we're not going to say that you can't, but it's going to go through your typical design review. It's a discretionary permit. You can be as creative as you want if you don't want to meet these base level standards. The intent of the objective standards here was to not be overly prescriptive, which aligns with where the city council was heading by trying to further economic development, further development within the city, and not hold it up from a design perspective in line with state mandates. So that's where The goal was to provide that framework for design, but still allow some creativity and flexibility. We're not architects. And so we still want to allow some of that variability within the design. And that's where the specific architectural styles, we're starting to see most communities are moving away from architectural styles because it becomes so prescriptive, everything becomes identical, and the community starts to lose that unique identity. And if you think about Cathedral City, Panama Heights, and Cathedral Cove, those are very different. And think of the downtown as very different. And when you start to lock in styles, what ends up happening is the uniformity goes everywhere and you start to lose identity. And so that's where our intent and kind of building with city staff and where the council direction was going is more simplistic, less prescriptive, that focuses on massing, articulation, site orientation. It gives some guidance on roof, but we're not saying you have to have a super pitched roof or flat roof. It can be all different types within this parameters, within this box. I also think this was touched on, which I think is very important, and this is something that we do in a lot of our objective standards, is having that flow chart. And Commissioner Malakoff had mentioned this. It's not uncommon to show how the process works. You meet the objective standards. Oh, okay, it's ministerial building permit onwards. You don't want to meet it. Here's that off ramp. This is where it goes back through planning commission all the way through. And we can work on something like that. A checklist is also another very common tool to use depending on the community. Sometimes planning commission does the checklist process. Can't hold up a project if it meets it, but has an eye on it. Sometimes staff has a checklist through this. But I just want to get back to the difference between Palm Desert, which is a great product. There is nothing wrong with what Palm Desert put forward. It's just more prescriptive. It takes just another step. And what we have been guided through this process was not to go that prescriptive. And it is fully objective. It is fully objective. And the other thing I want to touch on too is we had talked about a reorganization. This was brought up with the steering committee. The reorganization doesn't make sense. Where is this fitting in? And the tack that we're looking to take is to, in a way, dismantle what Division 3 is. And if we think back and look at what Division 3 was, you had a chapter for parking, a chapter for general, a chapter for lighting, shade, open space, signs, all the above, fences, walls. And what we're planning on doing is consolidating that chapter into breaking it down by development type.
That's exactly the opposite of what I want. That is exactly what my number one comment was. This whole thing should be set up like Palm Desert, where you've got site, architecture, landscaping, parking, because right now it just reads like 3 duplicate sections.
Yes.
There is almost nothing different between mixed use,
Well, the way that Division 3,
family, and commercial. They're almost all exactly the same.
well, the way that Division 3 is broken up now is by landscaping,
Yeah.
parking.
Stay that way.
This is probably going to take more discussion then, because the way that it's broke up now is Division 3 is meant to capture general standards citywide. That Division 4, that's your standards for specific uses. So within Division 3, it captures parking citywide, and within there you have a parking table that has residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial. It's all there. Part of the discussion that maybe there's some misinterpretation here, I think there is that we want to focus more on the development type. And so rather than sending you to different places of the code, if we're talking about commercial development would have its parking standards, its lighting standards, everything that is applicable to that specific development type. And that's how Division 3 we're envisioning would be broken up. It would have, like, Section 1 would be your global standards. Section 2 would focus on everything that pertains to commercial. So the parking would go there, your lighting would go there, commercial landscaping would go there, commercial architectural design would go there, would be objective. Commercial wall design, landscape, all of that would fall under that. You'd have your multifamily standards. Anything that pertains to multifamily from a parking perspective, lighting perspective, landscape would go there. And then mixed use. So that's how we had talked about a reorganization. Now, if we're steering away from that, I would like
I'm
city
just
staff to
confused.
jump in and talk.
Yeah, I'm just confused because that's the opposite of what I thought we discussed at steering committee and what the steering committee was requesting.
I think we have 2 different things going on. I think we're talking about the primary conversation that I remember from steering committee was removing the cross references. And that was a big priority. But I think we could do this one of two different ways, right? We could either have the global standards and then we could split it up by all the standards that apply to each development type. Or we could go back to the way that Division 3 is organized now, which is all of the elements, right? Fenestration, facade modulation, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. We could split it up at that. And then under each one of those, this is how you treat it for multifamily. This is how you treat it for commercial. This is how you treat it for mixed use. One way or either way that we do that is easier. I think we landed on, if we separated by development type, developers don't come in and go, how do I treat my lighting from they come in and say, I'm doing a mixed use product or I'm doing a multifamily product. I want to go to one section and go, how do I do all of my different elements under one umbrella?
But
There-
it's so- go ahead,
So
sorry.
there are a lot of different discussions that are clearly going on. There's staff to consultant, there's staff consultant and steering committee, and then there's the other three. So we're kind of at the end of the food chain here. And way back, one of our objectives from the RFP, prepare a unified, easy to use development code. That sounds easy, doesn't it? But I think I'm more tending to what you were just saying, and that's what I was really thinking, that yeah, we have to look at it from who is the user of the document. We're not the users of the document. Staff need to understand the document, all of it, and the people that it's intended for are really to help a developer decide how to put a project together. And the idea behind objective standards, for example, is to simplify the process for them. And the development code needs to do the same thing, which does lend itself to putting all of the stuff for a mixed use development in one document, essentially. We end up with a separate document for particular types of use. My concern with that always is duplicative processes. And, you know, what inevitably happens when you have exactly the same information in three different places is two of them will be out of date because they don't get properly updated. So that's a problem for anyone designing a document. That's a problem that you have to solve. And if I get to my comments, I'll mention something like, you know, I don't understand why we have objective standards, differing heights of lights on pedestrian areas, 10, 12, or 14 feet. Why? But, you know,
That's literally one of the things I always check with every project.
Yeah.
Is do they have pedestrian level lighting versus street level lighting?
Right. But so, you know, you need to be able to understand those differences, and there needs to be a rationale for them if they're different across a whole set of documents. But if one changes, does that mean you have to change the others? So my concern is really how you keep this living document living and not getting onto its last breath at some point, because we're not keeping up with the standards. So anyway,
Mr. Chair.
yeah.
I agree with the vice chair in that I understand where you want to go to not be too prescriptive, but I don't want to have a whole lot of nothing either. A whole lot of everything, maybe not nothing, but a whole lot of everything. So one of the things I remember when I got interviewed for the commission that they asked me was like, what do you hope to achieve by being a commissioner? And I said that I wanted us to move in a direction that when people enter Cathedral City, they say, now that's something. And in a good way, though, good way. Now that's something, you know, it's like, I think that when you enter Palm Desert, you kind of know it. And well, I don't want to say anything negative about anybody else, but I think there's some cities that are just very blah, and you drive through them and they don't stand out for anything. And I'd like us to have like a mission statement as to what we want to achieve with design and give people options. I mean, like you said, Panorama is very different than the Cove. And, but I think that we should have something that's this is what Cathedral City is. And it might be 3 or 4 different things. But let's say what those things are so that we can give the city some kind of design character.
I think that's something that maybe has been lacking from this process, that maybe at the very beginning we started this ball rolling. There should have been a workshop with the city council or the community say, what is your vision of Cathedral City, maybe by neighborhoods or whatever. And we never really had that discussion. So it's going to be interesting to try and articulate that in this document.
Vice Chair.
This came up a lot at the steering committee when we talked about these standards, and Councilmember Gutierrez is on the steering committee, and him and John Rivera, who's the chair of the steering committee. And I don't know, I think that might have been the meeting you came a little late to, but a lot of the conversation was about, we want quality, we want stuff that looks good. Now that's very subjective, right? And so the discussion was around, how do you take what we think looks good and make that into objective standards? And it seems like, to your point, that kind of didn't happen at the beginning. So I think there's this kind of lack of, Councilmember Gutierrez said multiple times he was concerned that, we weren't going to get quality development. I think I said something very similar, that I was concerned that we were just going to get very bare minimum, just meet the standards, and not anything that had character, that people were going to come here to build something that they would never pitch to Palm Springs. There was also a big conversation about color, and it seemed everyone on the steering committee came to the conclusion that Casablanca, which is 2 very bright colors, meets the current standards, but no one cared for that building. People used a lot of negative terms about it. And the building that almost everyone on the steering committee thought was beautiful was the House of Lucidity, which is 1 color and doesn't meet the current objective design standards. So if we're going, it seemed very clear that people have an idea of what they think looks good, but we're not asking for it in this document. And I'm not saying we need to say we want everything to be Spanish Revival. I don't think we should be doing that at all. I think we should be encouraging creativity, but I think that these are just too vague. And I said that during steering committee, and I still feel the same way. I think Palm Desert has done a good job of being slightly more prescriptive. I would say that when you drive into Rancho Mirage, it's Rancho Mirage because every single building is the same color, including the Taco Bell and everything that would normally have their own branding. And I think that's too far. I think they went, that's extreme, but I think Palm Desert is a good happy medium. There's different styles, but they're still giving people a menu, and they're still having some overarching kind of suggestion of how they want their city to look. And I think we could do that. Some of my comments were, because of the color conversation we had, we're basically saying you need to have a minimum of 2 colors and a maximum of 4. And I think if you're going to have 2, one of those colors has to be a neutral color. And I think that if you're going to have 4, no more than one of those colors can be a non-neutral color. And I think that's how we avoid red, yellow, blue, and green on a building, which no one's going to like, but which are going to meet these design standards. So I think we have to, on some level, think about what could happen and try to rein in. I think, I'm looking at it from the opposite way. I think of Commissioner Bedard, who's saying he wants there to be maximum flexibility. And I'm concerned about the worst case scenario, right? So
let me go back to Commissioner McPhail's point and ask staff. So in terms of what the council's policy or position is on how the city should be, what they're looking for in terms of, walkability, the architectural style, and how downtown might be different from other places. So city manager says, that information is already in the general plan, and they have policy in the general plan that describes that. And I have to say, I haven't read all 400 pages yet, but I'm still looking for it. Have we ever pulled that out? Do we have that as a document? that says, this is what the city wants according to the 2040 plan. This is what they want our city to be and look like.
So the general plan does have a community design element, where it does have policies and programs, and I'm not sure that that's been pulled out, but when we do our zoning code update or development code update, it has to be consistent with that, so we need to draw that connection.
I think it would be helpful if we knew what, because as Commissioner McPhail says, we started this whole process and we really didn't know where we were trying to get to. So it's like going for a marathon, but not having any direction. So we run 26 miles, we end up somewhere. So it would be useful if we can pull that together in some way so that we have a meaningful statement of what the city's policy, the council's policy in the general plan was for how they envisage the city looking.
That's what the goals and objectives statement would be that both Commissioner McPhail and I were talking about.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of the document, that would set the tone, what we want. And those goals, as the acting director said, it has to be consistent with the general plan. So those goals and objectives can parrot or paraphrase the city's general plan, but set the tone for what we want.
And just to layer in here, as part of this process, we went through and evaluated the community design element and extracted some of those concepts and made their way in here and had to craft them to be objective, because the general plan it's that fluff, it's that policy. We would like this to emulate a walkable environment that is, I don't know, desert. Well, what is desert? Desert design is somewhat subjective. It depends. Is it mid-century? Is it exposed metal? What are we living in a hut? I'm not sure. It depends. It depends what it is. So we did go through the community design element, pull out components. I think there could be a beefed up introduction section that does talk about some policy and objectives. I think that is something that we can pivot and look towards. But I don't want the commission to think that the general plan was a back burner document that wasn't evaluated. The whole purpose of this update is to align your development code with your general plan. If there's an inconsistency, it's not going to work. By state law, it has to be consistent with between both documents. I do want to touch on the color aspect. I understand the concern over color. Color gets very messy. And because in order to be objective, you have to be clear. Green is subjective. Yellow is subjective. When you want to start to play with the colors, you got to play with hue and the chroma chart and all of that. In order to regulate color, what we would have to do is have standards in there that staff would have to measure the color based on different scales. That can be done, and it has been done on other objective standards that we've done, but even bringing up what an earth tone is or what a neutral.
You just say one color has to be white, gray, or a shade of brown.
What is shade of brown? And
Shade of brown.
But
what is brown?
Yellow.
Like brown, but brown can be sienna, brown can be chocolate brown, brown can be almost caramel. But
Absolutely.
the point is it's so subjective that somebody can come in with 100 different shades of brown. If somebody doesn't like it, you don't have
I'm saying literally any shade of brown.
But would you say that I don't want to say the name of the business, but the business that you were talking about, I don't think they have brown, but they have yellow, which has a variety of different shades.
I'm not talking about any other colors. All I was suggesting was to avoid the one building that the entire steering committee said they all hated and they all regretted it had been approved. To avoid that, which meets these standards, we could be a little bit more specific and say you have to have two colors, but one of those colors has to be a shade of white, gray, or brown. And that can be defined however people want. I'm not going to get into what's yellow, what's orange, is this purple or blue. All of that's fine. They could pick any of those colors for the second color.
But let me, and I'm just playing devil's advocate as I'm thinking through standards and a project coming in. So if somebody wanted to come in and they had a shade of brown or white or gray, but then the other secondary color was neon blue, that would be acceptable in Cathedral City, a neon.
It's acceptable now in this code.
But I,
What we're currently allowing is one neon blue and one neon yellow. And what I'm saying is to avoid that, we could at least restrict it to say you can only have one neon color. Which I think is more reasonable.
You dealt with you on this discussion.
I mean, Palm Desert
Palm
has a
Desert
list of
does.
colors that
Yeah.
you can choose from.
3 examples. We had one jurisdiction that specified allowed Pantones,
About what?
Pantone colors.
Which
That's
is
the
too
color.
specific.
We have another community right now where we're specifying it based on a chroma scale. So it's a XY axis, further kind of the X and Y you go, higher intensity. Think of like those neon colors. And it has like a hue. It's basically measures chroma. And we would set a limit to prevent potentially more of those brighter colors as opposed to specifying a specific color. Or you get into just regulating number of colors and where those colors can be. So you can regulate, I would say that's the most basic form where you say you have to have 2 colors. One color has to be on different color on top, different color on bottom. I would say that's like the most basic. Pantone being that other end. Yeah.
I mean, Pantone is used in other areas of design, in
Sure.
publishing and
Yeah.
so on.
Sure.
and part of that goes back to the concern over the term earth color. And I use it all the time. Oh yeah, it's an earth color, but my interpretation of earth color is different. An earth color in Tahoe can be lime green and blue from a lake.
Yeah, you use earth color in my notes. I literally said white, gray, or shaded brown.
So I think all we're trying to do is remove conflicts when it comes to subjectivity, and the term neutral, the term earth, those are completely subjective. I think some of your suggestions, Commissioner Mead, about I don't necessarily care what brown, it just brown. It can be any shade of brown that kind of blends in. I think that's something where we can work with staff at crafting language, but I'll want to run it by legal to make sure that there isn't going to be any subjectivity piece.
I'm not saying this needs to be it. I'm just saying it seems like this is an area where we could be a little bit more prescriptive while still giving people flexibility. Because if we're saying people can use up to 4 different colors and we're not going to give them any guidelines, restrictions on what those colors can be, we can end up with really crazy stuff. That's completely ministerial.
May I jump in? I've been chomping on the bit. So I'm concerned because the Palm Desert has their look. It's very corporate, big box, that type of things. Palm Springs is their look, right? You know, Rancho Mirage, they have their look. I don't want us to look like any of those cities, right? Colorful cities bring tourism. Colorful cities raise up your happiness quotient as far as mental health and stuff of that sort, right? I'm obviously in the minority. I love the Mexican restaurant. I think it's fabulous. It stands out. It draws people. It brings business. It's happy. It's a joyous, kind of energetic color. Like I pulled up a bunch of cities that have multiple colors in them, and they're all high tourist attractions, right? We are not, I'm concerned that we're going to look like every other city around and keep our status as being the bastard child of the area. I'm looking for a way that we stand out architecturally, materially, colorfully, a way that we represent the majority of our community here, which is Latino based, which is bright, which is colorful, which is a enthusiastic culture. And I see a bunch of, like, I was on the Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce and I grew up in the Hispanic area. I'm not Hispanic. I think I have my roots there living in Mexico. I'm not seeing that type of experience represented. And I'm included. I'm a white guy up on the panel. I'm not seeing this diversity and this excitement and this brilliant, wonderful energy being represented. So again, I'm obviously the minority. I don't want the city that you're proposing. It's not interesting to me. I want people that paint a mural on their house. I want people that, you know, use alternative structures and materials and stuff of that sort. I want mass roof articulation. I know we have that type of thing. I want to go down the commercial corridor and see a pink building, like the famous hotel in Oahu that everybody goes to, and it's world famously known because it's pink, right? I want to see landmarks that are identifiable, relatable, and brilliant and bright. I don't want to go down Date Palm and see everything in 4 colors or, that we subscribe or that are all looking the same architecturally. Right now, that's already our problem. As you go down our commercial corridors, they look like every commercial corridor in pretty much California. They're boring. I don't want a city that's boring. I want excitement.
100% agree with you. So here's the thing is, I'm not prescribing this because this is what I want. I'm prescribing, I was coming up with ideas because I feel like this document has no vision. What you described is a fantastic vision. I would love to see that too. I would be 100% on board with that. It is a well-crafted, well thought out vision for how our city could be. And what you just described sounds fantastic to me. Right? I'm not trying to get us to look like every other city. I just don't think there's any point of view in this document at all. And so I think that if we are trying to make sure that we're going to end up with something that is creative, is good quality, is attractive to tourists, is going to make people excited to live here, we need to be asking for more than what's in this document. And that's all I'm trying to do, right? I don't care what it is, honestly. I don't have a preferred look for the city personally. I just want us to have a point of view. That's it.
And creating needs no character, but I think there's a midpoint between what you're both talking about, because I don't think everything needs to be a corporate image of something. There's a city in Texas that they say is the most well-planned city in the United States. And it's, I go there and my brother lives near there. I want to fall asleep as soon as I go in there. And you don't want that. But again, I don't want something like, I know a business that just did something to annoy a city by painting their facade purple with white polka dots. And, and eventually they changed it, but, that didn't go with anything. So we want something that could be in between, that's vibrant, but it has to have some kind of narrowing character. But I think if you have at first I wasn't crazy about the 4 colors, but maybe the 4 colors does work. And if you can use any 4 colors that you want, that can give you the vibrancy you're looking for, but it also gives us some definition. So it's not like totally crazy looking. But I think we need to prescribe a little bit more so that it's Cathedral City, not Rancho Mirage and not Palm Springs. And
Staff comment.
Well, I was just going to mention, Mr. Chair, I think what I'm hearing is a theme. So there is a lot of things that we don't want for the city. Can we be additive by being subtractive and saying, okay, here's the things we don't want? And I think that's what the objective design standards are really trying to do. And to Commissioner Bedard's point, and I'm going to look at our consultants, because right in the very front page of our RFP, we said we are not Palm Springs and we are not Rancho Mirage. We are in between those 2 cities. We are not either of those cities. We want our own identity. We want to be unique, colorful, a character. I see a Keep Cat City weird bumper sticker in our future, perhaps. But all that said, can we look at some of the things that we don't want to have and perhaps give that to our consultants? Because what I'd really like us to move towards is giving them some feedback of what we want, whether that means we've identified what we don't want, so that we can give them some feedback so we can move this guy forward. I would almost suggest if we can go back to the question that we were tasked with this evening. I know I didn't give this out to you all in advance, and I apologize, but you knew it was coming. So we would talk about these things, but if we could look at the elements that we want to talk about, and maybe to the point of, I'm also one of those people who doesn't find Casablanca offensive. I've never actually eaten there, but I've looked at the older, and I thought, this is definitely an improvement over what they had, which had a Spanish style roof. No offense, I like Spanish tile roofs as well. But if we can say, you know, we don't want bland, part of the reason the objective design standards act as they do is they say, if you've got a straight plain roof, that's not going to fly. We don't want flat facades. We don't want windows all over the place. We're asking for rhythm. We're asking for order. We're asking for composition. We're asking for these things to help make it so that it isn't boring, but we don't want it to be so prescriptive that it does feel like one of our neighboring cities. So what are the things we don't, if we can identify what we don't want, maybe we'll find a way to get to what we do want. Is that a fair statement, do you think? I think we need to do that through looking at the elements that are in that development standards or in the design standards that we have. Those will be building articulation, whether we want to address color or not. Some cities do address color, and you heard from the consultant, there's a dozen ways to do that. It gets very complicated. I've been on historic preservation boards. Defining color is not easy. It's very complicated. Do you want to task yourselves or staff with trying to argue shades of blue, hues of blue, the finish of blue? Is it a flat finish or is it a shiny? There's a million questions with something so simple as color. So maybe we can go through some of those elements and talk about what's most important and then start defining from there. Does that help? I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I want to try to see if we can distill some of that into something that's really workable that we can actually work with.
So we would have a list of things we don't want rather than a list of things that we do want.
Think of it as a list, but talking about what you don't want in terms of, we don't want to be boring. We don't want to look like Palm Desert. Whether Palm Desert, no offense to Palm Desert, if Palm Desert colleagues, people, I live there. So, you know, every city in the Valley, I have no complaints about them, but how do we articulate who Cathedral City is and what Cathedral City wants to look like? And we don't have a crystal clear vision in the general plan. That community design element talks about things in very vague terms. If you read that, you might get, all five of you might have a very different vision or a very different image in your minds reading those goals and objectives of what that looks like.
Well, I think that's your initial problem. As we said, or as Commissioner McPhail started us off with saying, you know, we didn't know what we were looking for to begin with. And we still don't know what we're looking for. But we have probably exactly 5 different visions of what the city would be like. By the way, I like color too. So, you know, you've got another vote for that. And I also like the interpretation of Casablanca as being yellow. So, but anyway. So I don't know that saying what we don't like is going to move us much further forward. We had a document here, which we already know is going away. It's being rewritten. And one of the problems with that document, I think one of the problems that underlies all of our discussions now is that it lacks any of the finality, any of the diagrams, any of the checklists, any of the tables that would make it an easy read. I go back to that statement, you know, prepare a unified, easy to use development code. This is not easy. None of this is easy because it's having to describe in words things that should easily be described in a diagram, you know, instead of having to spend half a page explaining to me that, you know, this is where the sidewalk must be and this is where the wall must be and this is the height. I just need a diagram. So I think we've missed the opportunity to be able to bring together the commission because we don't have a unified document in front of us. It doesn't really bring all those things together. So adding another layer saying, well, let's list the things that we don't like is not going to move this forward.
So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use our time as informationally as possible. So given what we do have and what we have access to, and then we have our consultant here, I would like to try to talk about the elements. So maybe we start, do we have, and I'm sorry, I don't have one with me right now. I can grab the draft copy, or if we've got the draft copy that we can pull up, we can go through, I think, some of the elements and start talking about what we want to include, if they need more attention, less attention. I think we can do all of that without having images. I'm going to use Vice Chair Mead's example of pedestrian lighting. When you have pedestrian lighting that has different heights, it depends on where it's at, right? So if it's along a pathway, you might have bollard height lighting. If it's a wider pathway, you might have higher lighting. So those objective standards go with some other objective thing. So what are the elements? Can we talk about maybe lighting and how we want lighting articulated through our objective design standards so that we can at least have something to work from?
I mean, I think we could, I mean, the multifamily section has all the elements. And in my notes, I basically, for mixed use, put all the same changes noted in multifamily, and for commercial, I said all the same changes noted in multifamily. So I think we could basically just take the multifamily one and just go through the different elements and talk about shade and lighting and trees and the articulation, and should absolutely do that.
So, and in that, those, if you're talking, say, multifamily, and you say, this is what we don't want to see in multifamily, that's the place to talk about, here's what we don't want to see in multifamily. Again, not asking for a list of elements you don't want to see, but what you're trying to avoid. What I'm essentially asking, the question is, what problem are we trying to solve by doing this? And if we can get to that, that gives the consultants something to work from so that they can write a standard that achieves that.
So you would like us to actually go through the document now rather than just address these generic questions?
I think all.
Why don't we
We've
just
got-
do
we've
like
got
all of our
questions,
comments
yes.
on open space and amenities, and then all of our comments on landscape and shade?
Sounds
So
good.
we should finish going down the line with people.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we really want to get to the material. We should get to the material probably so that we can give the consultants the feedback on the material that they have presented.
Okay, but before we do that, everyone except Commissioner Bedard had a chance to say generally his major points, so.
My big one was that I liked what you had said, that if I'm a builder and I come and I want to know, because I'm experiencing that right now with something I'm doing at my home. And I had, it was very confusing. We had to jump different sections of the code. As a homeowner, if I knew that I could just go to one place and it was going to tell me exactly what I needed to do, I would have had, especially as I'm acting as a contractor, which, by the way, everybody in the office kept saying, you're doing contractor, you're doing a contractor. And they kept trying to get me to hire a contractor, which was way out, thousands of dollars out of my budget, to be able to go in and say, I need to know exactly what's required of me and not find it out at the first inspection or the second inspection, because now I'm just racing to catch up, right? But so if I was a builder, I can imagine how frustrating that would be. If I want to come in and I want to build a 4-unit apartment building, I want to know exactly what is required of me right up front. And I don't want to have to hunt all the place for it. So go ahead, if you'd like to.
Okay.
So that's my main thing, right? Everything we've talked about leading up to this point of articulation and of styles and heights and everything that we've input prior to me, the commission has done a fantastic job on that. And we have really good things that we gave the input before. I want to see that input in our plan.
Okay, so we've been asked to go through these individually. So comments on open space and amenities. And this will apply, saying that this will be a general statement across all types of development. Is that correct?
So what we have is, I'm tempted to jump up right on that whiteboard. What we have for organization in the development standards section is we'll have global standards that apply to everything regardless of the development type. And then we'll have the development standards of design standards will be under each development type, multifamily, commercial, mixed use. We'll have them listed individually for where they are specific. So multifamily will have different open space treatment, different open space requirements versus commercial. And they'll be different for mixed use and where mixed use is placed. Those are comments and questions that we heard from the steering committee. How is it going to be different when you've got a residential use versus if it's commercial? We realized that that hadn't been, first of all, that division hadn't been sussed out in the development standards section, so that needed to happen. So we've worked that in and then put each of the standards underneath each development type. So these are some of the topics that are covered, and it really covers most of those objective design standards are fall under there as well.
So open space needs to be more welcoming. It shouldn't be something that people are afraid to go to. And I think it should be something that accessibility needs to be a major issue. So like, for instance, I can walk quite a distance, but I have to stop a few times. So an issue for older people is that you need in the open space more places to sit down. That makes it more accessible for older people. And there also needs to be things that make it more welcoming or usable for people with families. And it needs to be well lit. And I think that open space needs to be a part of any kind of multiple family over 5 units. And the other thing about open space that I think everybody forgets about is I'm a big proponent of community gardens, which is a part of open space. There's nothing that brings people more together than a community garden. And that's never been mentioned in any of the discussions I've heard. So I just think that maybe the main point, somebody else can know, is it needs to be accessible to different groups of people.
Well, I appreciate the comment, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm concerned. So if we look at front of you, but in 9000020, someone over here will have that. Point A, item 1, site standards. So that's where we are. And it already says open space and amenities shall be provided and designed in compliance with chapter XX, our friend chapter XX. So that's a chapter that we've already discussed, and we've already given that input. So I don't see that we're gaining anything by doing it again right
We
now.
discussed all of it.
We did. I think we've covered the fact that once we integrate these standards into one section, we will not have this cross-reference issue. I'm going to look at you because I want to make sure that we're all hearing the same thing. There's probably going to be some cross-reference, but I think to this degree, it's
Right. But what I'm concerned about here is, this is the objective standard. The objective standard proposed says open space will comply with chapter XX.
Open space and planning commission and shape.
Right.
They're not subjective.
Yeah,
They are
so-
objective development standards.
So then there's nothing for us to add at this point. We've already done that discussion. I don't want to repeat a whole discussion again.
Yep. So I think that's fair to say that we've already covered that.
Okay.
All of that.
So I think that's where the confusion, division 3 includes a fencing section, landscaping, shade, parking, open space, signs. And it's all development standards that apply citywide. So regardless, that's where all of those standards currently fall. So that's why you're seeing a lot of cross-referencing within here, because we're basically, that cross-reference is if somebody is looking within these standards, what we want them to remember is, hey, you still have to cover the parking. You still have shade requirements. And if you want to find those, they're located here. That's why there's so many cross-references in here. Otherwise, somebody might look at this and go, oh, I guess I don't have parking requirements, or I don't have shade arrangements. Not true.
And all that's understood. I think it's understood. But what I'm trying to get at is, what are we trying to do here?
Is part of the confusion from the commission that we have all these cross references, but if the objective standards, if we've already covered all that, we're really just focused on the architectural component,
Okay,
correct?
Well, it seems to me there's a difference between your wall can only be 42 inches high, and that would be an objective development standard to me. And what the materials are of the wall and how the wall looks, and whether it's breeze block or it's a mural, that's a design standard. To me, there's some, in a lot of these things, it seems obvious to me what's kind of development and what's design, I
But
guess.
even in the wall, even in the fences and wall section in Division 3, we get into allowed fence wall material and prohibited material citywide, not by project type. So citywide, so you can't have chain link, but you can do a CMU wall. It gets into those types, or wood fences are prohibited based on the desert environment. It's not conducive. So there's a lot of, we have all of those items in there. If you were to strip out a lot of what the current Division 3 covers, what would essentially be left here, parking would go away, a lot of circulation would go away. Anything landscaping wise would go away. All you'd be left with is orientation of the structure, articulation, placement of doors and windows, potential color or material change on a building. That's what this would get stripped down to if you remove that.
so that really should be our discussion point, nothing else.
Okay, well, I have some discussion, some comments on those things that are not essentially those things. This isn't the general standards. I personally think that duplexes should not be considered multifamily. I think multifamily should start at 3 units or more, and only because you could have a single family home that wants to convert into a duplex. And I think you guys were also at that missing middle thing at the APA. And I know you mentioned there's a lot in your area actually of those kind of conversions that happen. And it seems to me that those kind of projects should not have to comply with a full multifamily objective standards.
So we should evaluate the definition of what is considered a multi-unit development. So a
And-
duplex may not
Correct.
count. It would be.
Desert does not count
Yeah.
duplexes.
Would
They
triplex
specifically-
be counted within that as well, or?
It would be 3 or more.
And you can put 4 units on a property now as a single family residence, right? You can have a residence, you have the JADU, you have the ADU.
We do have SB9 lot splits.
And so you can actually, I would suggest, and funding for loans and mortgages and stuff like that is you get a different rate for 4 units and under than over 4. I would suggest we start at 5 units.
Well, but those are separate units. So multifamily is all in one building.
No, well, that's all in one building.
And you actually do, the
You
lot.
can have- you
and
can have your
ADUs, would you
ADU.
have- They wouldn't be
You
attached.
have your residence, you have your JADU, which is under the same roof.
And you
You can have an attached ADU.
3. So you technically could get 3
Okay.
as part of one structure. Yes.
I would suggest
Sorry,
that you
considered
start.
multifamily. Those are all still considered a single family use.
Exactly.
So we're just talking about multifamily.
So I would say 5 or over is a defining for multifamily.
So there's a benefit that it's purposely have built into this structure, which I think is why we're finding this definition of 2 or more. Because what we've done is we've kind of separated out the various units that are allowed to provide that further flexibility within your zones. Whereas before, I think it was just multifamily. And we created this category of 2, 3, 4, and 5 so that we could hit that more of that missing middle market, so that we could be very specific about where we're allowing 2, where we're allowing 3. So I would recommend that we don't necessarily change the definition. I'd say we would still, I would still like to keep that the differentiation between the two, because I think we can allow certain units in different places.
But how does that single family home that has 3 units, and does that become a multi-unit now?
No, I think what we could do is we keep the structure of the 2 unit, 3 unit, 4 unit that we've broken it out to capture missing middle, but maybe the objective standards in that 900-010B applicability, maybe it doesn't, the objective standards don't apply to the 2-unit, 3-unit.
And that's kind of what I
So
was
you would just
getting at.
remove
Yes,
those
that's-
types. It would only apply to 5 or more.
I would suggest 5 or more.
And then anything that's under that, if this is the direction, anything under that would not have objective standards applied to it. There would be no design criteria. It would just move forward.
Or-
It's like a single family home would move forward without that. That's one option.
I think 4 is a lot though, because a fourplex can be an actual new construction, like, I think 2 to Commissioner Malikoff's point, you know, a duplex could be a townhouse, which we didn't really call out in here, and those kind of, to me, would have a different design standard than a 4-unit apartment building, you know, and I think that's part of where, you know, maybe there needs to be more detailed about the building types, like Commissioner Malikoff mentioned,
Yeah.
different types of multifamily, because a 50-unit apartment building is going to be totally different than a fourplex.
Well, and a fourplex is going to be very different than a 4-unit home.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we're talking about 2 different categories. We're talking about multifamily versus single family, which that's a clear delineation, but then we're talking about 2-plex, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and then so on, in apartment buildings and townhouses and different types of, but I think what you're looking for is where's the delineation between what is not multifamily and what is multifamily? And I think the example that you're using with the single family and the JDU and the ADU and, you know, potentially more of those, that's still always going to be single family. Those are treated as their own separate units and they have separate standards because they are preempted, we are preempted by state law.
State.
Right.
Yes. So I think everything above a 1 or 2 needs to be that line. I guess where you'd find that right now, the city defines anything above 2 units, so a triplex or above is considered multifamily. The state has generally considers anything 5 and above as multifamily,
Mhm.
just because that's how they do their counting.
But I don't think that there's, and maybe legal wants to weigh in here. I don't think that there's any issue if the commission is recommending to remove, let's say, 2-unit and 3-unit from the objective standards, that the objective standards will only apply to 4 or more. That should still be fine. It's not precluding, design wouldn't hold up the 2 or 3 units. Those would just get approved like a single family home. There'd be no difference, correct? So we can make that adjustment to where these would only apply to 3, basically a triplex or more.
So I will say that we'll obviously like double check all of this, but that is my understanding as well.
Okay.
We're giving them more flexibility, if anything.
Essentially, you're allowing the 2 and 3 units ultimate flex.
Exactly.
Exactly, because we're, yeah,
That's why I think it's legally.
yeah.
But it's not going to change the definition that the city would still consider it a multifamily product. It just doesn't have to comply with the objective standards.
Okay.
Applicability would just be different.
Yes.
Do we want to go through this list or?
Well, I only have like 2 more things, so let me just do mine and then but the other one, because you asked about orientation. And I was a little confused because it seemed like what we were allowing was one of the things that buildings could be oriented. Remember the exact language, it was like either the street or a public, a parking lot or the publicly accessible area.
It's more of
It was
an eyes on this. It's more of the, yeah, it's or because it's not every project may have all the units oriented toward a street. And part of it is it's from a safety perspective, like the SEPTED perspective, which
For
is.
sure.
So that's where you want to have visibility from entrances onto public spaces that are within a project or onto a street or onto pathways. So that's where that's where the or comes from. It's trying to be flexible throughout the process by not, because each project site is going to be different. We can't be prescriptive.
I guess my concern was just, could we end up with a ton of apartment buildings that have a parking lot behind them and they have absolutely no entryway onto the public right away? That they're all faced inwards and we're basically just looking at the back of a building with some back windows. Like, shouldn't we require there to be one entrance that's
You can.
oriented to the public right of way so that there's a front, the building is fronted on some level?
Yes, you can do that.
Yeah, that seemed to me just like something that, you know, the or went a little too far, I thought.
Did you have something to add to that?
Yeah.
So I love the idea of there being a front articulation for the building or orientation. And we also, really good environmental planning on a building is looking at the direction of the sun, how the street is positioned for that. Like if we were really, I think that the old builder over in Dream Homes had a big point there when what they were doing, where they orientated the house not to the street, but to the direction of the sun. So your front door isn't facing directly south. So if you were forced to, if you have a lot that's just a square lot and you're building a house, ideally, if for our environmental purposes, solar purposes, like for everything that's good for the lifestyle of the home and environment, is to face the building, whether it's a commercial building or whatever, away from the front entrance, away from the direction of the sun. So how do we take in like things like what if the building is, if the street is south, let's say south facing or west for us, right? Or east, it could be east facing. So the front of the building is, in traditional concepts, everything would face east, but now you have giant plate glass windows like what they're doing at Sun Community Bank, and you have full sun going directly into that building, right? There's no consideration that their air conditioner is going to have to be going twice if the building was orientated differently on the property.
It requires directional. Talk with staff about this through design consideration, because the goal would be to try to orient, for habitable purposes, structures to reflect their environment. But it is hard because not every site has the same access or the same positioning to be able to do that. So part of that is maybe on certain, direct sun facing, you have expanded eaves, or you require greater landscaping or greater buffering, try to mitigate some of those environmental impacts. And we've been talking to the city staff about that based on comments that have been trickling in.
So there's additional costs that the developer is going to have to really come up with in order
Potentially.
to, that's a lot.
Potentially, yeah, potentially.
Yeah,
But
I-
I mean, but I say potentially because it depends on the appetite of the community and the recommendation that moves forward. Is that something that the city wants to require?
Mhm.
Because that would be a requirement as part of an objective standard.
Mhm.
It may be. It may be. Who says?
And it depends on if it comes through as a shall. It shall be cited this way or it is not. We had recommendation in a previous objective design standards that I worked with where it was a recommendation. And it went largely, site design came down to the preference of the developer.
I hang out at the new Starbucks and it's a problem because those windows, those plate glass windows, they have these giant plate glass windows and it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, you haven't been sitting out there looking out into the mountains. It's gorgeous. And that patio and those windows are in full sun almost the entire day. Like you're just sitting in there, even with the air conditioning cranked all the way up, you can feel the heat in the winter now coming through those windows.
But don't we elsewhere have requirements that like for a mixed use building that the ground floor has to have large windows to allow people to be able to see in? And typically with a mixed use building, like if you have first floor retail, don't we already have requirements in there about the amount of window usage, which has to be on the first floor of the
Blazing
use?
requirements for mixed use and
Yeah.
street activation.
Yeah, because usually you want those kind of big windows there to encourage people to come in. And so since those already have to be oriented towards the street, we've already defined that in elsewhere in the development code. So I guess I was just concerned with multifamily at least that to your point about the eyes on the street, I think it is good to have some sort of entrance.
Mhm.
I think this is that with the treatment that's referred to as a four-sided design. Or it looks at all four sides of the building. Especially if they're not backed directly into another building, that they do have to have similar treatments on the backside.
And then I thought there were just some standards, and I sent a list to Cynthia, but there were a lot of standards. It seems like we didn't have in here. Now, I don't know if there may be in other sections, and I've forgotten that we covered them in other sections, but you asked about amenities, right? And I did notice that like Palm Desert does have a list of like a menu that you can choose from of passive amenities and active amenities. And I was like, I know we talked about amenities, but I'm not sure how
So amenities-
specifically we were.
Yeah, so amenities was an initial concept that was brought up, but did not make its way into this set of objective standards. What we fell back on were open space requirements applied citywide, not project-specific amenities. And that the project-specific amenities should really be up to the developer knowing their market, not us necessarily prescribing it. Does that align
I
with?
think so. Yeah, and I think that came down to, should we be having picnic tables for our lunch staff or should we be having the little soccer?
Correct. And some objective standards do get down to point tables. We've done that. Point tables by amenity, you have to have 100 points and the pool is 10 points and the pickleball court's 20. Highly prescriptive. And I think in this case, we're leaving it up to the developer to know their own market, to know what's going to rent or sell.
So I would agree with that unless it's public space, if it's private residential, but there's some problems in our city where people don't have access to water or people don't have access to electricity or things of that sort. Now that opens a whole other can of worms I brought up before. But if we're talking about commercial spaces, and I think I'd sent some pictures to a few of you of Smoke Tree Plaza, and they have the big built-in overhangs over in that area. Like it's a public retail space, privately owned, right? In that situation, I think there should be that mental health capability of seated spaces, as Rich was talking about, of shade covers. There should be some sort of water source, whether it's a fountain that's for a pup fountain that's at the bottom and a human fountain at the top, or even electricity, where someone more and more, we're going to become even more electrical dependent in our future. And to have public places where you can plug in your devices is super, super important.
And we do start to get into that within the commercial standards that went forward to steering committee there. For commercial, there's required outdoor seating area. There's required terraces. There's required plazas as an option on corners.
So I know we had talked about that, so I'm glad.
And part of that came out of the walking tours that we had. Walked through the Stater Brothers lot and realized, ooh, you get burnt before you even make it in. So how do we create more inviting spaces that have street activation, but still allow that community aspect component, gathering spaces that are enjoyable year round to be outside in? And this does start to get into that. Is it prescriptive enough? I would ask the commission to weigh in. But yes, we do start to tackle that under the commercial standards.
So Chair, I apologize. I only budgeted 3 to 5 and I have a client. So I was going to sneak out a couple minutes early, but it sounds like I'm going to sneak out a lot early where the length of the conversation is going. So I apologize. And I hope that you hear my voice, maybe a little bit, when other things come up. And what would Peter say? I would appreciate that. All right. Thank you.
I was going to
3
say,
other quick things and then I'm done. I'm just gonna listen. I don't remember us discussing stairwells anywhere. Did we talk about stairwells in apartment buildings, multifamily? I don't think there was.
No, the last
I know
time we
there's a big
talked
debate
about,
about that.
the last time we talked about multifamily and we talked about the different, this was at our actual last planning commission meeting we were at. We talked about the different areas where parking, and you had a great example in LA about resident versus visitor parking and mixed use, but we didn't get into the whole stairwell discussion.
Okay.
But we have done objective standards that do cover open stairwells, where they're located, how they're.
Yeah, I was just wondering, it just seemed like we didn't have it and I just wasn't sure if I missed it somewhere. And then,
Design considerations for stairwells that you're concerned with? Placement considerations?
not particularly, I just noted that it wasn't in there at all, so I wasn't sure if we needed to have, like, especially for outdoor. I'm not less concerned about indoor, and I know there's a big debate going on with the state about whether or not we should go from 2 required to 1 because, so I don't think we want to get into that debate. I was more thinking about external
We've brought in external standards. I think we tend to craft them more around crime prevention through environmental design. So we're looking at like what features are attached to stairwells, what types of materials, is it climbable from the exterior? Are they viewable stairwells? So we started to look at kind of like view sheds. If that's something that you want us to factor in, it's something that we've crafted in other jurisdictions. It really is going to come down to the type of development, of course. But exterior stairwells is something that we can certainly address.
And then same thing with garages, parking garages, like I'm thinking in multifamily buildings of like, entrances to garages, how those are designed, not necessarily in terms of an architectural style, but like, I don't know, just how people come and go. I guess it didn't seem like we addressed that anywhere in there. And I'm not sure if it needs to be addressed, but it seems like if we're talking about ingress and egress, that maybe there should be something about, whether garages need to be on a main street or a side street, or if they can be on both, or if they need to be visible to have the angle of the driveways. I don't know.
And I think that may be a larger discussion with city staff about the applicability of parking garages. Is it an objective standard or is it a parking circulation standard that should go in a parking section? It may be more of a citywide discussion on placement, screening, access for parking structures, and it's not really tied to direct commercial. So I think that's something that we'll need to frame. You can require screening standards.
Because like I'm
that as
thinking,
well.
yeah, like, I mean, you don't have this here, but in LA, there's a lot of apartment buildings where you have an underground parking garage that is at an angle that goes down, and that's almost like, and your first floor is actually starts like here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so, and with those, they all have gates, right? Usually garage gates for security, like, do we want those to have any sort of standards? There are buildings there where the angle of the garage is so steep that like, I think people have determined that they were dangerous and they probably weren't to code. So like, is there any sort of thing like that where we wanted standards around the angle of the driveway? Like, that's sort of just what I was, and I don't know that that's something that's going to happen here soon, but it could theoretically happen in the future as we get into multifamily.
Yeah. It would be really interesting to follow up with Public Works to see.
Building.
Yeah, to see kind of what their standards are, and I see opportunity for consistency, or at least some referencing to those. I know in some jurisdictions, when it comes to more of the larger multifamily developments where it's more of like a gated controlled entry, we do often set requirements for stacking. So you don't end up with a situation where you have cars waiting to get into a keyed entry and now they're backing onto the street. So creating some sort of minimum standard, or requiring that guest parking spaces might be located outside as opposed to inside those spaces, something that we've factored in. But I think that us doing our due diligence and talking with Public Works and Building would be the next best step if we're looking at expanding those.
That's it for me.
So I'm going to move to Commissioner McPhail in a second, but before that, let me check first of all on timing. How is your timing?
We're here.
You're here to stay. Good. Okay. Which case, we've been here 2 hours. Let's take a 5-minute recess.
Asked if they.
Okay, I call the meeting back to order, and I'm going to use moving to Commissioner McPhail for his comments.
Before we ended was actually in relation to something we've been talking about, the amenities and open space, and the general theme of our prescriptive objective design standard ought to be. And I was just going to point, as I would be in danger of doing throughout this entire meeting, the Palm Desert that the vice chair also mentioned in relation to amenities, because they have a page that it doesn't prescribe you shall do this amenity. It has a list of 4 different things, like gazebo, passive water feature, picnic shelter, seating areas. You can do one of those things. And then it says for a certain number of units, you should have one of these things. For more units, you have 2 of these things. So you know, there's flexibility and you can mix and match. And I don't think most developers of these multifamily or commercial developments that we're talking about for these objective design standards are going to do silly things like having a red and a yellow apartment building. They're going to be sensible in the choices that they make and the options that we give them. They're not going to do mad things because the market wouldn't like it. So I think we're a wee bit overly concerned about being prescriptive. I think they would make proper choices within a list of decent options. And to hark back to the color option in Palm Desert, they said things like the vice chair was saying, like you'll have a neutral color. And I don't know if they had a palette or how they defined their colors, but they made the point you can have an accent color and a neutral color. So, but it didn't say it must be red and it must be blue. It gave you some options. And I think there is within these sorts of, we have lists of items that they'll make the right choices, but we just have to decide what those items should be, I guess.
And I just clarify the commissioners, you had brought up the amenities. Are you just using the amenities as an example
Yes.
of optional approaches, not recommending that we include an amenities table?
I was doing it as an example, and I don't know what we currently, I don't remember what we currently have in the way of amenities. Do we even mention these
No.
are acceptable?
No,
I
so
mean,
the way that amenities are handled is it's pretty much up to the developer to determine the market of the project that they are developing,
Yeah.
whether they want to include
We want
a
to do
pool or
something.
not. We're not requiring as part of it any amenities because the
Mm.
developer will add amenities see fit for a development.
Mm.
That's kind of the tack that we've been taking as part of this process. So that's why I just wanted to clarify, because what I was kind of hearing was, well, I like the amenities because it sets a base
Yeah.
standard for what we think should be included, but we haven't gone that route. So I just want to clarify what you're envisioning.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't know what was in there. It does seem to me in a multifamily environment that there should be some sort of amenity.
No, if Ms. Molina wants to add.
Looked at the chapter several months ago, but there was a chapter on the zoning districts that talks about multifamily and open space and common open space. I'm not sure if that's in the zoning districts or in the development standards where it talks about multifamily and common space ratios and private open space ratios. And I guess the question I was asking Cynthia was whether when we said common open space, if we did clarify that it had to be active or functional. There was, I believe, some level of distinction in that regard.
Some level of distinction. I will just preface the code has gone through several iterations since looking at that. And I would have to go back to clarify what's in the Palm Desert example, which several communities use in their objective standards, gets into what is considered part of that active space, what's considered recreation, and that you have to include a recreation component, whether it is a sport court, whether it is a gazebo, a barbecue pit. The barbecue pit has to have a table. It gets down
They
to
were
that.
passive. They were listed as passive amenity.
Passive, the terminology, it just
Yeah.
requires that you have some sort of on-site amenity so that every project has it. The tack that we've taken through this is to not get that prescriptive with this one and to allow the developer to choose any amenities, if any, that they want to require. We're not going to specifically say you have to have a small pool, by the way. It's always a real thing, by the way. It is, it's a small pool. I'm not lying. Oh, gosh, wow, that also a slip of the tongue. But yes, we haven't gone to that level, but I was just clarifying because that was the example you used, if you were wanting it to go to that level.
That's a good
Do we
point.
run the risk, though, that in an effort to build a lot of cheap developments, that we end up with all
amenities.
multifamilies that have no amenities?
I think one of the
Stops
things,
that from happening, I guess, is if we don't have any requirements.
I think one of the things that I had on my list that I was concerned about, which I think you're getting at, is we have to remember that the developers aren't going to be out for what's good for the community. They never are. They can pretend they are, but they're not. And I think we need, the specifics are better because I feel sorry for staff in that if they get a developer that's going to come in and try to bully them into some product like you were just talking about, that's just not so nice, but that meets all the standards, and then they'll just get bullied into administratively approving it. And that's not what we want either. So I think on one hand, you want it to be open so that they can come in with something and get through the process. But on the other hand, you got to give them a framework to work in.
And actually, we just had an example quite recently of a development that changed its recreational areas. The original plan involved some degree of, I think, benches and some other, maybe even little exercise area. Now it's just dog parks. In other words, just a green area where the dogs are going to do their business. So they lost their human recreational function in that redesign. So maybe, I don't know, I'm not opposed to the idea of saying, you shall have an amenity of some sort in a multifamily.
I think you and the vice chair and the chair are correct in that you have to be you have to give some framework. You don't want it to be so tight that it's a beige square building with no articulation, but you have to give a framework for them to operate on. And that's what I think we're looking for, the happy medium.
I think,
Oh, go ahead.
just going back to amenities, we'll go back and look at that and where it is. But I don't think we want to call out amenities in our ODS.
What's that?
I don't think you have to design standards should call out what the amenities are. I think that if we're looking at that somewhere
Like on
else.
this list?
You're saying it should just go in the regular development standards? If it was gonna go somewhere?
Yes,
Should be a choice of many things.
but what I'm saying is, I'm not sure that the objective design standard is the appropriate place for it. That's all.
Oddly enough, it's called out in just one place, which was in the RV standard. The RV standard required things like, toilet facilities and this building, and we had a whole list there, and that's the one place that we've actually talked about amenities. So, but yeah, well, first of all, if you put it in as an objective design standard, it doesn't necessarily become limiting. So if you say any one of these, it doesn't mean you can't invent some other thing as well. So just because a roller skate park is not on the list of amenities.
Once again, that would be discretionary.
You can build it if you want, and then it would
But there's
require.
lots of different pools, let's say, like I went to a house in Palm Springs that had an infinity pool. I'd never seen one before, and I could have just walked right up off the edge into it. But that's one type of pool. There's other types of pools where the amenity could have, a stacked waterfall at the end of it, which would give it more character. But just within the idea of providing a swimming facility, there's so many things you can do.
I think we can leave it to staff to investigate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we can always do in these meetings is give the staff and consultants the feeling of what it is that are concerns for us. We can't necessarily come to an exact solution.
And I agree with you, Chair. I think we've gotten the spirit of what the commission is looking for from a better set of guideposts for amenities. Where those land and how they're addressed, we can work out with city staff.
So would you want to mention like different, like I have this book that I used when I did historic preservation, anatomy of a house, and it listed like all the different kinds of windows and all the different kinds of doors and all the different kinds of roofs. So would we want to say in more detail to have a double hung windows or to have 3-panel doors, or to, that we would want to see like I can't think of a good roof right now other than a hip roof. Let's say, do we want to mention that or leave that to the discretion of the developer?
Part of the tact on this was to leave it to the discretion of the developer. So if we look back into our standards here, we have a standard that deals with roofing. And what it gets to, here it is. So, well, I don't know, don't put the hats in front of you.
I do.
But it, page 11. Here. It talks about roof design and it just says roof pitch shall not exceed a rise and span of 512. What you're starting to get to is when you typically have steeper roofs, they start to emulate our mountain style architecture. Reason we have steep roofs is for snow. Here in the valley, it's more flat roofs or very lines that align with more desert style architecture. So part of that was not stating whether you need to have a gable roof or a hip roof or this, but just says the roof itself cannot get over a certain pitch. That'll start to dictate roof design without specifically labeling the different types of roofs. So it does leave some opportunity for the designer to go, okay, we're going for a more shallow roof. Let's find something that works. So that's where it may be vague, but it gives a little bit of flexibility and creativity to the designer. Otherwise, what ends up happening when you start to regulate the roof and then we say you can't have a stucco, but you have to have this, you'll start to, I can think of a specific building in this community, this direction, that doesn't know what it is. And part of it is that it has 5 different styles attached to it. And I remember on our walking tour, it was pointed out, our design guidelines did this because they're basically took a Lego block and put all different types of Legos together and doesn't know what it is. And that's why we're trying not to get too prescriptive and go that direction. So that's why we're leaving that design. We're leaving flexibility for the designer to actually be a designer within the confines of this box.
But we do prohibit certain types of roofs right in that next section.
Certain types of
Materials.
certain types of roof materials, yes. Roofing materials, you can start to dictate, that's not gonna change whether the pitch. So if there are certain roof materials where you go, we don't want metal seamed roofs in the city. Okay, that's fine. It's metal seam roofs sometimes are more traditional industrial farmhouse style development. So if you're not wanting to include some of that, then
We don't want shake.
shake is limited through
The
building.
point is, I'm just saying that we are saying there's certain things that are not allowed in that next sentence. So we could be more prescriptive in the previous sentence if we wanted to.
Yes,
That would be more than the pitch. That would be.
it would be, yes. But this is where objective standards have like that other spectrum. Then you don't regulate the roof and whatever roof comes in, comes in.
Right,
I
exactly.
mean, that's where
No,
that's where you.
You
But-
could do what Palm Desert does and they list like a dozen types of roofs that are allowed and then they say these types of roofs are not allowed. I mean,
offer.
they're a happy medium, I think.
I'm gonna go back to the statement that I made earlier about not dictating style, right? This is a good example of where we're trying not to dictate style and instead of prescribing some kind of an elemental treatment of that feature. This is the objective design. So when he's talking about modulating or mandating the roof pitch and saying it shall not exceed this pitch, that makes sense. But saying mansard style, hip roof, leave those styles out of it and just talk about one thing that you can control. And that makes a lot more sense for us.
And instead of prescribing all the different roof styles like Palm Desert did, which is not wrong in application, you could literally just give a pitch of roof and leave it at that. It doesn't matter about a dormer. It doesn't matter about any of that because all you care about is a shallower roof line and that's it. And then it's open to the designer. Otherwise, you could go the Palm Desert style and say, hey, we want to see these 10 styles of roofs. But now anything other than that is not allowed.
And that approach, what he's describing is Palm Desert is listing out, here's these different styles of roof. Now we're getting back into the idea of design guidelines and that's what we're trying to get out of it.
Where does the Adobe? A technical question. An Adobe roof,
Yes.
which is basically flat, so that would be under the pitch you're talking about.
Yeah, so it would allow, so the maximum pitch is a 512. So technically an Adobe would be considered a flat roof, even though it's
Zero.
never truly flat. There's runoff and water and a bunch of things. But yes, it would be allowed because it's under at maximum pitch.
Right.
You're just not gonna see what you traditionally would see in Big Bear.
Chalet.
A-frame.
Village, you're not gonna see an A-frame. No, which then someone might say, well, have you been to Joshua Tree? There's tons of A-frame homes up there. Okay, that's desert too. That's where it starts to.
And putting on my devil's advocate hat. We had that discussion already. Actually, you can see an A-frame. It's just you can't go through this particular design process.
Correct. You can be
Go through an alternate design process in order to get an A-frame approved, particularly if it's shaped like a chimney pot or something, you know.
So it's not prohibiting design. It's essentially giving your fast track lane and the standard traffic lane. Standard traffic lane is discretion. You can come in and do what you want, but it's got to run through the channels. It's going to go before planning commission. Otherwise, the fast track lane is the objective standards. You meet these base standards, you can go straight through ministerially. That's how the state views it. There's two different tracks.
Depending on the project. Depending on the project, I just want to preface that, depending on the qualifying project, not every project is going to go through ministerial.
Right.
Just the ones that are qualifying.
Thing I would just qualify and add this last thing on here too, is that I would say probably somewhere between 65 and 80% of projects that would be our aim, for 65 to 80% of projects would go through ministerial objective design standards. And generally call that success. It's not going to be 100%, it's not going to be close. But we're aiming for that.
Let me just circle the wagon slightly here. I just want to remind everyone that we dismiss the things that have already been discussed in other meetings, so we're not looking at those. So we are looking at massing and articulation, site design for corner parcels, materials, doors, windows, and roof design. So I want to see if there are further comments in those in those areas. And I do want to come back because he never got to finish. But Commissioner McPhail was starting on his list.
Well, I don't think I do not recall the items you just mentioned. What the front of us to opine on.
Okay.
I mean, the only document we had did it talk about massing and articulation?
Yeah, in here.
I didn't make any. I guess I wasn't really.
Yeah, there are lots of different references, articulation of
the
walls.
So with the chair, the objective standards do include articulation, orientation of the structure on site. They do get into the different types of materials, whether it's cement, plaster, brick, natural stone, ceramic, terracotta.
That's what you mean.
Roofing materials, ones that are allowed and prohibited. Wood, shake, shingles, fire code issues aren't allowed. So it does get into all of these different components.
And none of them scream to me. I mean, I guess the only small tiny things I had in terms of the structure standards that were mentioned, and they're very small, and it's maybe like things that were listed versus things that were not listed. 9.00.020 A2 AI2.
That was seamless. That was great.
And this is just tiny little thing. It's talking about balconies. It's AI2. It says 9.00.020 A2 structure standards. And then there was AI2. And it's just something I noticed because we have an example behind us. It mentioned a choice, and it was a list maybe, a choice, because I don't have it in front of me, choice of projecting balconies or canopies to add interest. And so it was talking about balconies or canopies, projecting balconies or canopies. And I just have, because I live in the Cove, there's a new apartment building just going up across the street where they don't have projecting balconies, they don't have canopies. What they have are like recessed, flush to the wall. You've got the wall plane here, and their balconies are recessed.
So it's like an upper floor patio,
Yeah.
but it's in. It doesn't actually project
Yeah.
out.
So that was something that was not mentioned as one of the items on that list. So does it have to be? I mean, should it be?
Well, I think that's a great catch. And yeah, I think it should be. It should be an option, whether it's a covered patio that's recessed, or whether it's a projecting balcony, or whether it's a Juliet balcony and it's just a sliding door with a rail that opens up. Yes, I actually think that's fantastic. Thank you.
So recesses so you would feel that would satisfy that need for projection or recess for that private space, whatever it be.
Condo in LA was that the balcony was inside the footprint. So, but they still had a wall and that was decorative or a metal gate, depending on what you were. So from the outside, you saw the balconies and floors were clear, but they didn't project.
They didn't go beyond the exterior wall. They were.
And another part of structure standards, which was in the same area, DI and D2, right?
Mhm.
Which was talking, it was a list of materials that may be used, I can't remember now, on exterior walls. And then the other list were materials that are prohibited from being used. And I was actually going to piggyback onto Commissioner Bedard's request from us in the past, where we did that unconventional materials presentation. And I was going to ask, unconventional materials are not on those lists, which would therefore mean not on the list, it would be a discretionary process. So they can still be achieved that
And
way.
I think what Commissioner Bedard was getting into was not so much exterior materials. He was talking about the application of building construction. So hay bale construction, or whether you use jean insulation, that would come down to a building code an issue necessarily. The objective standards wouldn't prohibit that type of construction. You just make sure it's compliant.
The thing about our discussion of alternative construction materials, some of the alternative materials still lend themselves to looking like a more traditional exterior finish. You can still do that. But I think where it comes maybe a little bit more problematic is if someone was looking at a house made of sandbags, may not be, based upon that design, may not readily lend itself to that.
And something like that would require discretion. It would.
Yeah.
But the list that we have here, I'm not going to go through the whole 90020. That's a pretty extensive list. Most of the development within the city complies with this right
Yep.
now.
There was one other thing I may have caught that may not be a thing at all. 900020, multifamily residential design standards. A1A talks about shade trees, but I think it says something like shade trees if provided.
So,
And shouldn't we be requiring some sort of shade?
well, that's where I almost look at this and I go, let's think about everything that's covered in Division 3 right now and just remove that for the moment. And let's just focus on the actual architectural application. Shade trees are covered extensively in landscaping and in the shade section and in the open space section. Parking's required, there's a lot. And the city is going through a subsequent process where they're bolstering the shading requirements as well. So we're taking them even further than what we originally presented. So I would forego that one.
Even with the word if.
Thank you.
I think those were, I'll stop there and let someone else chip in.
I will, I'll just follow up on a couple of points. I have a lot of minor points, which I'm just going to mail to Cynthia.
That's something I hope that you all are sending these to staff. I see a lot of comments that get into the real granular level, which helps our team. And I understand that if we went through every one of those, it would be a sleepover with the planning commission. So if please send those all to staff. I know you probably have, but that really helps us work through all of these pieces.
Okay, 9010A2. I didn't follow the discussion about having a double-sized window. I think it was the language there. It says that if you have windows on the side of a building, you've got to have a double-sized window, a window that's twice the height and width.
Yeah, it's getting to wanting to maximize window size. That's one method. We can definitely simplify it.
I think more than anything, it was the language which confused me. I couldn't quite work out because it said you've got to have one window in the wall that's double the size of any other window. But then, of course, you'd have to have another window that's double the size of that one because that one is in the window, in the wall. So,
we can definitely refine that language further. There may be opportunity to simplify it.
So that's simply to give variation then. That's the,
It is.
yeah,
It
okay.
is, yes.
I did, going way back to discussion, I had a concern about murals too.
Okay.
And my concern there is that any essentially public art, we need to have some sort of control over both what we might describe as our moral standards, but also cultural standards. You know, if somebody wants to put up a building, 3-foot tall building with a Native American in a headgear, you know, is that an acceptable mural on the side of a building? I don't think so, not anymore. You know, so I can't understand how we can have an objective standard and control over the appropriate type of content.
Can I,
It-
okay,
yeah.
can I try to answer that? And I'll do my best to do that. We have a Public Arts Commission who oversees the project itself. So the Planning Commission, the objective design standard is only the placement, right? So we might have a space that is required for that, but the Public Arts Commission, the PAC, as it's referred to, that item itself.
Any mural that anybody puts up on a building is going to be
If it's
reviewed.
Now, if it's private,
These are all private, aren't they?
yeah, yep. If it, now when it's private, that's
Well-
different. We don't have any.
I'm saying you build a block, you know, a 3-story building. So it's private in the sense of being owned privately, but it's certainly on display all the way down the street. So how do we control that?
I'm gonna look at legal for that one because I don't, it isn't, well, trying to think of,
Because we listed as an option, right, of
Yeah.
a treatment for a wall that's
Yeah.
facing the street. If it's that you can either use a breeze block or have differentiating texture or a mural. So I think.
We're not getting into the content of the mural, which is getting into First Amendment rights and speech. We're basically saying if you're going to have a mural, it needs to fit within these confines, no more than 50% of the wall up
That's
to
a
edge.
concern about.
But I think your concern is over not so much of whether the mural can be there, but it's the content of the mural itself.
Right.
And so that, you can see that we left that out because we can't start, just like with signs, we can't regulate the speech.
Right, but what I'm
yeah.
trying to understand how the city is going to manage that situation. Because if we say that it's an objective, it meets the objective design standard, you can put up a mural, but we don't have any way of revisiting that and saying, well, no, you're not having a huge naked lady
I have to
painted on
default
the
to legal and city for how you've handled murals in the city now.
We don't have a really good,
So if a multifamily project comes in that's private, wants to paint a mural of the mountains, the city has no control over that mural because it's not public property, it's a private project. Just like if I wanted to paint that in my backyard here, I could on my back fence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say that that's true. That is true. We have nothing to prohibit that. I don't know that we have them popping up, but we do have, like I said, we have the pack for those public.
In more urban environments, I know we've seen this in the Bay Area and Sacramento, you've probably seen this in LA. It's not uncommon for multifamily developments to have murals.
Right.
And yeah,
Have, you know, like a mural in a random.
We do have some on Chipperosa Lane.
so all we're regulating is the size of it, but not the content. I think you bring up a good point. But I think it's going to be a larger discussion about how the city wants to handle and regulate that.
Because the lawyer in Desert Hot Springs when I worked, we had a real issue with somebody in a single family home. They were into theater and they put up this big obnoxious, and I like theater, the Greek masks, and everybody hated it. And we never could get them to take it down, and the judge just didn't want to interfere with it because he said it was First Amendment. But it just you have to be really careful with murals. But my thought is that it can go into a really odd direction too. Like I had somebody that applied for a mural that they were going to do a Picasso, and the city just wasn't ready for this Picasso that had people with extra body parts. And the city just wasn't ready for that. And we were able to say no, they didn't question it. But I could imagine if it went to court, probably we would have lost. And
Well, it's a question I would like staff and legal to consider. So
I think to the question that you're asking, or at least the issue that is on the table right now, it's really about the private realm, the murals in the private realm. If we remove the requirement for a mural or the option for a mural in a private realm, we don't have an issue.
Right.
We have at least one private mural that I know of. No one's objected to it that I'm aware of.
if you use a mural on private property, can't the Cultural Arts Commission not review whether it's appropriate for that building or not, but review what it looks like as art?
So they review them for approval through the public arts program.
Yeah, so it's
Right.
it's funded, any art that they are reviewing is funded
That's
through.
because the city gives them money, but could they also review something that there's no public money in?
So there's two levels to this, right? Is it's application under ODS, but there's another question about right now, the city's looking at updating their public arts ordinance that would also apply to residential uses. And so I don't want to blur those things. Yeah, I understand. This is a discussion about a standard in our development code, but here we're having some other discussion where we might now require public art in residential developments. And there has to be a process for that.
well, so all I would say is perhaps you don't make it an objective standard at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take the mural out.
Yeah.
It becomes
Then
discretionary.
it becomes the city's legal problem to decide how they're going to
Peter.
deal with it.
Yeah.
you know?
So then
it's
it
not-
becomes discretionary. And then there is discretion about whether or not.
Okay.
Don't, as articulation in.
I think what we're hearing from the commission is, and I think this might be the cleanest route right now would be to strike the mural section from 90020.
Keep it in commercial?
I would say strike murals throughout. The mural would drive the discretionary process that then would give the city the authority to review the mural through a future ordinance.
And the idea with the fences and walls and creating a mural breakup was on our tour when we were walking in those residential neighborhoods. And there was the long strips of the walls where it was just blank. I think collectively we all looked and went, well, the ones that have some sort of architectural feature or some change in modulation, some landscaping really breaks up the visual character of these long lots and parcels. And so we were trying to take that and look at creatively, just based from what we heard of, like, what if we were able to apply a mural standard to this, where you're not having to actually change material potentially, or the texture or the variation, but you could apply an artistic design.
If somebody could still do it, they just go through the discretionary process, just like
Correct.
If they wanted to do like a Snow White development of pointy roofs.
Yeah.
Or two brothers that we could be on your.
No, and that was my house with the mask, so I'm a little. But yes, I think we can strike that.
General comment that I should have said first was, I noted the list of definitions at the beginning. And long time ago, we had a discussion about ensuring all definitions are in a separate appendices, because otherwise you have to go through all the documents again and change them wherever they are. So let's not start adding in definitions in the ODS. We're not creating a separate document here. It's actually going to be built into the
Division 8.
So the definitions in San Ramon in the objective development standards were there because it was its own freestanding document,
Standalone doc.
right?
The only time you find definitions sometimes embedded would be like wireless. Usually definitions or adult-oriented businesses usually retain those. But here, these would get folded into division.
When you wrote that document, the definitions really were independent of the municipal code because it was a separate document.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah, and I think it's when we'll take the tact of drafting and dropping in specific definitions into ordinances is kind of this exception when those terms will be very specific to the ordinance that we're talking about. Where in any other use of that potential term, it might mean something totally different when you're looking at it from, when you're applying that term, let's say, when the entirety of the code as opposed to one specific section.
We can fine tune the definitions that are in the standard code later.
Our tact would be to drop any sort of verbiage and terms that you would find in these standards would be to drop them into the overall
Right.
definitions.
We'll get to look at those again later.
I'm going to skip over the several pages of notes I'd made about breeze blocks and cinder.
But I would like an opportunity to look at those notes. I'm breezing over them.
Other than to mention that the language is out of date, and now we should refer to CMU or concrete masonry units.
Technical language, yes.
Yes. So anyway, moving on to the fascinating area of transparent fenestration facade coverage.
Don't sound so excited. Yes.
I was a little concerned about that because we live in a desert. And so I know that there are ceramic coatings that can be used to cut down IR and heat transfer. And so we're saying everything has to be absolutely clear. And so I was looking at some other city standards, and it seems like in order to ensure that we don't get the problems that you get from tinted windows, you can go as high as a 50% VLT and still have very visible access both ways in and out of the windows, yet you can apply spectrally selective films that work with IR and so on. And I think it's important we do whatever we can to control heat. So I would just reword that to ensure that that is an use. Because otherwise, under the objective standard, you won't be able to have any kind of covering on the windows to control the heat. Yeah, I think those were my other main points. I've got other detailed stuff that I'll send you later. Other comments?
I just looked over all the specific comments. I'll email them to you, but the big two are screening of parking, so that you need to have like a hedge in the commercial so that, you know, you don't see the parking. And also in the residential for the multiple family, you want screening so that the adjacent single family doesn't have headlights going into their living. So you want to put that kind of screening in. The other thing is something called living walls. So we're talking about all the articulation that we can have, but one thing that wasn't mentioned anywhere that I saw was like putting in like a star jasmine to climb up the wall. You know, so that's what a living wall would be, and having a vine climbing up it to me would be a more economical way of providing articulation than providing other types of things that are more expensive architecturally, but putting landscaping in to make it a living elevation or a living wall.
Okay.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
I always have pause when we use landscaping for screening, for articulate variation, only because maintenance isn't always done. And we have so many examples where we'll see maybe blank walls because the.
Like that cell site that I've called you about?
That's right. So, and that's the thing. So, you know, maybe it's it's subjective. That's just was my concern. And you'll see that my comments throughout is just that using landscaping.
But if you do like a 3-foot wall, I understand what you're saying, but if you do a 3-foot wall, it's kind of, you know, to provide the screening in a parking area from the adjacent uses, it's kind of vanilla. Whereas if you have a 4-foot hedge, yeah, you do have to maintain it, but it looks a lot better than a 4-foot wall does. I understand what you're saying. And then for the articulation, yeah, it has to be maintained too, but I always like that. I call it the Ivy League look, you know, when you have the climbing vines going up the wall. So I think those two things look really good, but we could put maybe a note in there about maintenance. That it's assumed that you're going to provide a high quality of maintenance.
We've found, just going through our tours of the commercial centers and landscaping, is that maintenance, whether it's done or whether it's done improperly. And I know that's something that the city staff has really struggled with, of what is that enforcement tool? How do you go out there? Do you have a plan that specified operations and maintenance, and who's following that and following up on it? My one kind of caution with, I like the way where this is going. I like the idea of creating more flexibility. The one thing that I'm thinking of is, what in that bad actor situation where the star jasmine is planted and a year later it's no longer there, and the commission allowed kind of this blank, potentially allowed a blank feature or a blank wall in some instance. I think landscaping is very prone to not being maintained.
I understand what you're saying, and I believe me, I've had to deal with that too. But on the other hand, that's what code enforcement's for. I think we have to balance. Yeah, it's sometimes hard to get people to maintain something, but you don't want to lose accent landscaping for the sake of, it might be a problem with them in the future. It's just a balance you have to make. But I do understand what you're saying. Let's just find something that could provide proper screening and just give them the option of either providing a wing wall for 4 feet, I think it's called a wing wall, or a hedge. And then the living wall is just one type of articulation that you can provide with all the others that you already mentioned.
Or you specify somewhere that it must be maintained.
Like expansion joints and other things somewhere in there. And then I think I said somewhere that you could put like quarter foils up on the wall or something like that. But the ivy that I was talking about as an elevation was just one of many options you could have.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about it, a lot of these, the more design standards, I guess, the ones that are less development standards, require maintenance. I mean, lighting, if all the light bulbs go out and all your pedestrian lights and you don't replace them, I mean, you're now no longer in compliance with what we want to do. So, I mean, I think ultimately, if the city's gonna say, these are the rules, we also have to enforce them.
100%.
Right? And, I mean, I think we need to be known as a city that will.
Do we need some statement of maintenance for some of the standards that we covered enough through our general code compliance?
And one thing that you point out, Vice Chair Mead mentioned something like a blown out light bulb or burned out light bulb, which is easy for code compliance to notice because you see that the mass is there without a bulb, right? But landscape is much harder to detect when code doesn't go out with a landscape plan going, oh, I see they're missing their bougainvillea. Yeah, it's very difficult. And it becomes something that gets eroded over time, especially with landscape. But the flip side to that is, do we want to be a city that's all hardscaped, in meaning that we have more furnishings or walls or some sort of structural features that are treating or screening rather than softscape, landscaping that is used to do that. We have to figure out what that balance looks like. What is it that we want to be known for? Because there is a definitely a delicate balance.
And I think from the shade perspective that you're really working on, that is where you are trying to build in more of those soft shade features as like a base minimum into open areas and parking areas that maybe we wouldn't necessarily need the full reliance on, in incorporating softer features into structural standards potentially.
With that landscaping, I could talk about that a little bit. We are still working on contracting with a landscape code writer, but in that conversation, one of the things we want to talk about is when shade is required, right? We're talking about, okay, if we're looking at 50% of spaces, how are we going to measure those 50% spaces? That 50% of each individual space, 50% of the overall parking area. How are we going to measure that? And then how is that provision to be made? If we're going to require 50% to be, and that means 100 square feet, Does that mean that 100 square feet has to be provided by shade canopy, tree canopy, or can it be by shade structure? What is that mix going to be? I think we had that conversation when we were talking about development standards previously. But we're getting deeper into that conversation to find what the appropriate mix is, because again, we don't want only structure where people say, I'm just not going to put anything. But then we don't want people to try to put in small teeny trees that they don't maintain, that don't provide the shade in a reasonable time frame. So some mix of both will be the ideal.
And Chair, if I may, I want to be cognizant of time with everybody. I know we've been working since 3. There is one lingering thing that I really want to get direction on. Yes, from Planning Commission. And I brought it up and it was a whoa moment.
Can you save it to last?
I do, because I feel like the discussion we've got through standards, I feel pretty comfortable where we're heading from a design standpoint. But I want to touch on organization. I don't feel the organization is nailed down. And my concern is I brought up where I thought we kind of were heading, and Planning Commissioner kind of had a deer in the headlight moment. And I want to make, because this is going to have implications on structure. So the way that I'm just going to point this out, the way that this is structured here in front of you that talks about has global standards. So this is almost what we were proposing the new Division 3 would look like. So how Division 3 is broken up now is almost like what's on the screen. There's a chapter on open space, a chapter on landscaping, a chapter on shade, chapter on parking, chapter on X, Y, and Z, and they apply citywide. One of the discussions we had with city staff was modifying that based off the discussion from the steering committee, where Division 3 would change to where you would have a section that talks about global standards citywide, parking, lighting, landscaping, shade. Underneath that, you would have a section that is multifamily standards. And in that multifamily standard section, you would have shade, lighting specific standards, parking specific standards, if any, and then architectural standards that apply. Then there would be another chapter that would be commercial. And it would basically take everything that's in Division 3 and that applies to commercial, and it would fall there. That's one approach that when I brought up earlier tonight, kind of went, whoa, I don't know if I like that approach. And I want to talk about that because the public review draft will not have that restructuring. That restructuring will happen after the public review draft stage, just based on our timeline that we're on for adoption.
This big box that has the citywide standards. And then that applies to everything. And you'll have a box here for the single family residential and that addresses all the same standards, but goes into more detail. And you'll have another box right here that goes into the multiple family, mixed use and commercial.
That is kind of what we've envisioned. I think Brent's going to draw it out for you. We had floated an initial.
I scared him off. I wasn't sure.
So let me just say, because I think I was the person who had a visceral reaction against that. I understand after listening to what other people have said that it makes more sense to maybe have them grouped by the project type, even if that means it's extremely repetitive.
Yeah.
Because if you're building an apartment building, you're just going to go to the the multifamily section, and all your standards are going to be there. The only caveat I would have to that is that I think that makes complete sense if the standards are more than minimally different. And what I got from reading.
Not always going to have that.
Right. And they may change over time to become more specific. But I think the document that we have currently, there was only one or two things, like literally one or two lines that were different between multifamily, mixed use and commercial. And so to me, it just seemed like it was really duplicative, and you could easily just have one set of standards and then like Palm Desert just put in parentheses for the few that only apply to mixed use or the few that only apply to commercial. They say you know, it actually, I listed it somewhere, but it does just say like, you know, example, upper level glazing, mixed use only, right? So they'll just call out when one is different, but otherwise it just seems like an easier to read document because it seems like you're setting the standards for the whole city.
There's a few different approaches. The way that the current Division 3 is, it has the chapter on parking, the chapter on signs, the chapter on landscaping, chapter on shade. These apply citywide. So if you go into the parking section, it talks about valet parking, talks about it's about parking ratios, parking lot layout, and then it has a parking table. Industrial exponency. One proposed route is to change this and go, instead of a chapter for each of these things, each of these fall under the product type. So under multifamily, you would have signs, parking, architecture, shade, lighting, landscaping. Under commercial.
Well, that's the current document we have, is set up
So-
like that,
But
right?
that structure you see there would get applied to Division 3 in its entirety. Another one that's not up here is to maintain Division 3 as it is. And the architectural standards, not development standards, architectural design, get populated with the multifamily zones, commercial, industrial zones, design standards, height, set.
Yeah.
Oh, also. There's a few different routes. But this is a because the structure is big, very time consuming.
In your proposed column, let me ask you this, is there repetition of
Yeah.
the same standards? See
Over again.
okay, the problem,
And the one thing that can get a little, to be frank with you, is somebody might go, actually, a planner in our office said this. Okay, we were talking about multifamily, commercial, mixed use. What about industrial? What about single family? Well, essentially, those would get folded here. And then the question a planner had in our office was, well, why aren't they given the same attention? And then it does have the opportunity to get duplicative. I don't know if you want to, I know we've gone back and forth over this as a team.
Yeah, and I think maybe what might be missing is that the intent is not to be repetitive under each development type. Maybe we should assess this out more, and we didn't, but the general standards that are global for citywide standards should include those things that should not be repeated underneath unless there are specific deviations from what's generally applied citywide. What this does is this addresses in where the current Division 3 does not break out different treatments by development type, where we were asking the questions, is this applied to residential or is this applied to commercial? And maybe it's just as simple as residential, multifamily, residential, commercial. But when we're talking about things like shade, if our citywide standard is shade shall be provided at 50%, boom, that goes on the top, it doesn't go in every other place. We say that once. We don't say it in both places. You say it in one place. And that way you've got a citywide standard and then you have if there are specific ways that we treat shade in multifamily differently from how we treat it in commercial, then we would make those notations in those separate sections. But as thus, we don't do that. But when it comes to like parking layout and access, we do treat those differently if it's multifamily versus commercial. We want things to flow differently. Signage, the same thing. Trash screening, right? Commercial developments have large collections of trash, so we'd expect that to be someone work off farther for that, but maybe we treat those different where there's residential uses. So those are some examples of where those things are different. Open space is a good example of where we would have we would have different standards based on the type of development it is. We wouldn't put that under, we might have the types of trees, those are going to be generally global, citywide. But when it comes to how that open space is articulated, where the open space goes, what the amenity, you know, we talked about whether we should have amenities or not, but if you were doing that, those things would go in those development type breakouts, but you wouldn't have them in both locations. Is that helping to define that a little bit better? So we would not, the intent is not to repeat them.
So I think
They have to be some sort of cross-reference though to those other sections, where is when we might start involving cross-references. Because what we don't want people to do is just look at multifamily and go, oh, all I have to provide is X amount of shade, when in reality it's this specific standard for multifamily plus all the citywide standards. So we would need some sort of cross-reference to say, hey, in addition to these multifamily standards in this chapter, also go to this chapter, but then we're introducing those
I
cross-references.
don't think that's how we would do this. I think and I'm thinking back to one that I used previously, and I guess we can talk more about this. But when it's citywide, it's citywide. If it's also multifamily, we don't have to say, by the way, you have to apply to citywide as well. We don't need to keep repeating that. That's just understood.
But I think what you avoid in your proposal is this. 10 years down the road, after you've made ordinance text amendments, planners are faced with doing amendments and not checking the rest of the code to make sure that the amendment that they're doing is still consistent across the code. And then you wind up having conflicts, and then that's not good. So if you have this universal section and then you dive into all the others, then when you make the changes to the general section, that's the only section that needs to be changed for the universal requirements. So you're going to avoid those kinds of conflicts down the road. Am I right?
Would avoid those conflicts because if it's a citywide standard, if say we adopt a shade standard, we say it's 50%. 5 years down the road, we say we want to up that to 60%. We don't put it in every single section. We put it only in the citywide section.
I think that might be a good way to go, rather than having the same standard mentioned in residential and commercial and, industrial and all that, because then you have this universal section and then you don't have to worry about it being in conflict with another section.
So
If that makes sense.
let me come into planning. New developer, don't know much about it. I want to build a 6-unit condominium, 3 stories. I have a lot. What do I need to read?
Well, first we look at your zoning. And then we go to the development standard. And if you're doing 6-unit condominium, can I make it, all right, 6 unit, that's fine. What we'll look at the citywide standards. Whether we put the parking table in there that says, here's what the parking table, your parking spaces are going to be 9 by 20. That's a citywide standard. It's not going to change across development types. Your sidewalk standards are 6 foot wide. That's not going to change across standards. Well, it might, I'm sorry. Let me.
Well, I can jump in, I can
Yeah.
jump in here, so. What I would end up doing is going to Division 2, your zoning districts, make sure multifamily is allowed right off the bat. Then you would go down to the development standards in Division 2, which is your height, your setbacks, all of that. Once you go from Division 2, you would end up going to Division 3. You would need to look at your multifamily and check what is specific, whether there are specific sign requirements, whether there are specific parking requirements, whether there are specific architectural applications, design applications. You would also need to confer with the general citywide standards as well. So there's 4 or 5 areas you would need to go look at to make sure your project is complete. Because you still need to look at the general standards, because the shade is 50%. The shade isn't going to fall here, it's going to fall here. So you would need to make sure that it's still compliant. So I could think of 4 or 5 sections between 2 divisions, potentially 3 divisions, if there's standards for specific uses on top of it in Division 4.
So would we build a roadmap for developers that says, if you're developing this, read Division 2, Division 3, or whatever we're calling it now, the general section and this subsection?
If you think back to Division 2 in your allowable land use table, there was if you think back a few months, there was a column on the side that had other applicable sections, and it had cross-reference number sections. Essentially, you would plug where multifamily is an allowed use, in that column, you would plug in whatever this number is in this division 3.
Okay.
So somebody should be able to look there and go, oh, I need to double check this and this.
All I'm looking for is easy use for this document.
The applicant is going to jump between sections.
Right.
So you're gonna have to, I think we just wanna try to limit how many jumps they're making.
This is a disconnect always in any organization between customer support and the customer. That when you go to customer support, they go, oh yeah, it's here and pull over this one. And if we look in there, because you know it, you know everything about the documentation set, but the customer doesn't. And so this needs to be easy to understand for the customer, which in our case is the developer. And even if it's somebody new in planning that they go to, it should be possible for them to pull out a route map and say, yeah, multifamily, you should be doing these things. So if we can do that from that, I'm fine with it.
One of the things that we looked at, there was, and I think it was the city of Palmdale, they had a guideline. It was like a 2-page little flyer. And other cities have done this as well. It's a terrific thing that what I want to be able to do is I always say, if you are a customer sitting in your pajamas with a glass of wine and it's midnight and you got this bright idea that you want to build a business, you should be able to do that from your computer and figure out. Generally, you'll still have to go to City Hall because there'll be questions you can't answer. But generally that's our aim. That might be 80% of it. But when staff is at the counter, I always say, when Skip comes to the counter, Skip is our front person, he's our front line, generally speaking. When someone comes to the counter and asks a question, I want Skip to be 99% of the time he can answer those questions without having to go, well, wait, we've got this section that says this thing, and we've got that section. And why is this in the zoning section when it's clearly a standard and it should be over here? And why do I have to go to 6 different sections? So I think what we're trying to do is, like Brent said, minimize the number of jumps. I think that's what you're saying as well. I want to try to keep as much as possible in what we call Division 3, the standards section, as much as possible in there, not repeating those separate standards under whatever's universal, global, citywide, stay there, and then everything else has its own specific piece underneath it.
Yes.
2 questions. So one, what you just said sounds good, but it seems to me like a lot of the same things are still going to be duplicated in these 3 sections because they can't be universal because they don't apply to single family and industrial. So, right? Because even though the reason it looks so duplicative to us is because all of the multifamily, commercial, and mixed use have 99% of the same standards or 95% of the same standards, but because they don't apply to single family or industrial, they can't be part of that universal section at the top. Is that correct?
I think half of that is right. I think that because there's all of the standards right now are listed under each type.
Except for single family and industrial.
Right, and I'm gonna leave those off of the table for right now, but why they're duplicative or duplicated is because they're all repeated. But for the ones that don't need to be repeated, that are universal, that apply.
But I'm saying a lot of those things seem to be universal if the universe was multifamily, commercial, and mixed use. So could you have a citywide and then everything that's not single family and industrial, here's their universal rules, and then really only the ones that particularly apply to mixed use, commercial, and multifamily, which would be a very small number of things. I'm not sure that's worth it. My second question, just because I think that's more important, is you mentioned a third option. Is putting these specific things in the zoning. And I wanted to find out more about that because that seemed interesting to me.
The other option would be to leave Division 3 with its parking standards. You're not extracting anything out of it because the way Division 3 is structured is it's citywide anyways. So valet parking citywide, this citywide. Yeah, there are some specifics in there, but leave that as is. The architectural standards that we talked about, okay, let's only think about the architectural design, not the development standards. Those are use specific.
Right.
the zone, Division 2 is use specific. Division 4 is use specific. They're both use specific. Division 3 is not use specific, and it's not built to be use specific. It's built to be general, regardless of zoning district, all these things apply. So the other thing that's not up here is whether the architectural standards get pulled out and get dropped in to the zone standards, because that's use specific. And the Division 3 just stays as is, because you'd have to go to the parking section anyways.
So it would almost be laid out. Can you put like allowed land uses, development standards,
Architectural
and
standards.
then it would go architectural
Right,
standards?
we went through all those, right, from like, it's a pizza parlor, so it has these I mean, it wasn't that specific, right, but we did retail and then big retail, we had all those, so it would group with those things, correct?
So anything that has to do with like fenestration, massing, articulation would fall after the development standards in Division 2. It would be allowable uses, development standards, building and architectural standards.
I mean, that's, to me, seems almost like the cleanest thing and is a lot less restructuring, but I don't know what anybody else.
Well, I think one of the points about it seeming duplicative is because we're reading the whole document. And that's why I'm asking how people are going to use the document.
But if what he said is the first step, or someone said the first step is they would go to the zoning. Right, to see what's allowed, if what they want to build is allowed in that zone. So if that's the first place they go, and then the only other place they have to go after that is Division 3, that's 2 places. As opposed to the original, what we were describing is they start with the zoning, then they go to Division 3, then they go to Division 4 for their specific stuff, and then they also look at the Division 4 general citywide design standards, right, which is 4 steps.
Oh, I think they're both 4 steps. It's just 4 broken up in different ways, right? You're still gonna go to zoning, you're still gonna go to the zoning standard, then you're still gonna go to development standard, and then you're still, if applicable, go to Division 4, which is specific use standards. Either way you do this, you're gonna go the same.
Specific use standards with Division 2.
The specific use standards is Division 4, and that only applies to certain type of land uses that we want to have special or specific standards for.
I think we were saying, I'm saying specific use because the way that the development code is proceeded forward right now is you have your zoning districts, allowable uses and development standards. So what can I do on my property? What's the height? What's the setback? That's Division 2. Division 3 right now is structured as general standards that apply citywide. Parking signs, landscaping, shade, fences, walls. How do I measure a setback? What's my vision triangle? Division 4 is standards for specific uses. So it's different, it's uses from Division 2 that warrant additional standards and discretion. Car washes, adult-oriented businesses, wireless, home occupations, and then you have your administrative. So that's how everything's oriented right now. So what it does is, in this format, it takes that Division 3, which is general, and it doesn't make it general anymore. That's why I'm saying use specific, because now we're categorizing as, yes, this first part is general. All the chapters aren't general anymore. So it's not general standard, it's use specific, it's multifamily specific, commercial specific. So it's just a different philosophy of how Division 3 works.
But if everything except for architecture was stayed in Division 3, and the only thing that is addition that's specific for commercial, multifamily, and mixed use is the architectural component, the massing and the articulation. If that was put directly in the zoning Division 2, you wouldn't need to have that stuff in Division 4, and it would just be Division 2, the zoning, and Division 3, the general standards. I don't understand why they'd have to go to Division 4 if they took everything from Division 4 into 3 or 2, then they only have to go to 2 places, correct?
So this is the same, you're talking about the same thing. All you're saying right now is where we cut the line for Division 3. Do we cut it under general standards and leave general standards in Division 3, or do we take all that stuff below it and move that into 2?
Well, it sounds like
Do we just leave it the way that it is and make all of these, call them architectural standards?
Division 3 is already universal citywide standard. So why wouldn't we just take the general design standards under the proposed there and lump those in with Division 3, so everything in Division 3 is citywide standards? whether they're development or design. Doesn't that make more sense? Then those are that's what you were gonna do anyway, right, originally? Is take Division 4 and incorporate it into Division?
No.
Not Division 4, these objective design standards, right? So if you took the universal ones and put them into Division 3, then all the universal ones are in Division 3. And then the only things that are unique for these 3 particular uses go in the zoning code.
Why don't you just keep the ones that are unique in the standards section where all the other standards are and call them different? Call them something different. Instead of putting in the zone, put all the standards in one division. Makes sense.
I
You
think.
still have to have Division 4 that has
Yeah,
very
yeah.
specialized
Yeah.
uses,
And
like
those
a,
are
like
very
a
different.
drive-through.
I think what's gonna help, and this is not gonna be the answer that people like. I'm gonna be frank, because I think we're all friends here. I think what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to, with the proposed route that we've been talking about with staff about dividing it up by general and then commercial, multifamily, I think we're gonna need to basically parse out what that actually looks like. When we break it out like this, think of the parking section. The parking section is about 75 pages worth of standards. That's one section within Division 3. We'll have to go through that parking section, pull out what is applicable to multifamily, pull out what's applicable to mixed use, pull out what's applicable to commercial, extract those pieces, and then populate those within these sections. And then make sure that everything else in that parking section that's general would fall up here, is how that format would work. So we'd have to go through each of those Division 3 sections. I think what we'll need to do is play with that to see how that flow actually works and how it looks. I think what might happen is the amount that's in Division 3 now, I think if the majority of it's general, this front chapter is gonna be huge. It could be 200 pages long, just this front piece. And then these pieces would be condensed and smaller. So I think what we'll have to do is look at it visually to see how that flow works. Is there a right or wrong approach? No, there is no right or wrong approach. Are there conventional approaches? Yes, but there's no right or wrong one. I think, but right now we're talking in this hypothetical. What I was trying to do as part of this is just trying to get the Planning Commission's flavor, because the next time that you see this document, it'll be put out for public review. That restructuring won't happen at that point. It'll happen after the public review stage, once we get all the public comments. So just, I'm almost trying to prep the Planning Commission for the process of what's to come and just trying to take temperature.
Can I ask a question, a clarifying question to what you just said? So you just mentioned like the parking section could be like 200 pages long or something like that, right? 75 pages long. It was a big number.
It is long right now, yes.
Okay.
And we'd have to go through it, because you think of the parking section, there's valet parking. But valet parking really only applies to one type of development, not single family. So you need to determine where, but
Oh, not single family.
you need to determine in the parking section, where is that actually applicable? Is it only applicable to commercial? Is it applicable to commercial mixed use? Then are we extracting that? And then my thought goes, okay, well, if it's applicable to commercial mixed use, is it the same standard? Well, then it is duplicative, because you'd be copying it in 2 parts. Do you see what I'm saying? It may
Yes.
not be, it may not apply to multifamily, but valet may apply here and here.
Don't make it that complicated.
It does apply to multifamily for sure.
But it would have to, excuse my spit, it would have to get dropped into those 2 sections. If it's not applicable to all 3, it wouldn't go here. It would need to.
I think the litmus test of whether it goes on the top or whether it goes somewhere in the bottom is if, and back to, I think your question was, when is it majorly different? Right? If it's substantially different between multifamily, commercial, and mixed use, we might not anticipate that it would be in mixed use, but it doesn't preclude it from being in mixed use, so put it in general. Just leave it as simple as possible, and only the things that are specific to multifamily, commercial, and mixed use, those standards, those get broken out. And I think what you're describing is that general section will probably be much longer. But when you're talking about architectural standards, you'll have more architectural standards that will fall under those specific pieces, especially when it comes to mixed use, because we don't have a lot of mixed use. So how we express mixed use, and particularly the differences between commercial and residential, those will need to be in separate sections, but they shouldn't be in a zoning section. That's I think of that.
So
Well, I think the problem with what you're saying is that the general section at the top, under the word proposed up there, are the general design standards, correct? Not the general development standards, which are in Division 3. Is that accurate?
That's all Division 3.
We would pull out all of the general design standards that we could and put them into that first chapter.
Okay, so,
Create the development and the design.
but that section, which you're saying is if it's the same for mixed, multifamily, commercial and mixed use, then that means it's a general standard isn't accurate because it's not universal because it doesn't apply to single family or industrial.
But what it's saying is that it's not required for them. I think we'd have to see an example because I think we're getting a little bit into the how it operates, but I think we'd have to have an example. I think parking will be a much more general discussion because I'm trying to think of when the parking standards are different across uses, and maybe I'm misspeaking.
Every use, right?
What's that?
It'd be different for every use.
Parking standards?
I think the parking standards, and that's the reason why I picked out parking is because the parking standards do vary across the board.
I think the access standards are different. So like driveways and
But
access.
I agree. I think what we'll have to do is almost mock a section to see how it flows and probably pick the most complicated one, which is probably going to be parking. Parking is probably going to be parking, and even signs gets a little funky in sections too. So I think we'll need to mock a section up and then run it by to see that structure. I do want to reiterate to the planning commission though that reorganized draft is not going to be in that public review draft that goes out in May. The effort to reorganize a section like that is substantial, as you can tell, as part of our conversation. So that'll come after the fact. But I think the importance here is just to let the planning commission know we are listening to the steering committee, we are listening to the planning commission, and are actively looking at restructuring and reorganization to reflect your expectations and comments. So you can kind of see the back, how we're trying to, and the same question that planning commission is asking and bringing up are the same ones that we're having, the same dialogue.
Exactly.
So we'll mock up sections. I at least wanted to hear some input from planning commission on what you're thinking, because that'll help drive some of the conversation.
And let me add this one. I know I've talked a lot tonight, but I want to add this other thing to this. This whole conversation exists because objective design standards. It's a new tool for the city. That's what this whole thing is. But because so many cities who have done San Ramon, including San Ramon, Palm Desert, Palmdale, a lot of the cities that we talked about who've done objective design standards had done these as an appendage to their existing code. We don't have to do that. When that aha moment happened, it was like, wait, why are we treating it as it's a separate thing? Why don't we integrate it into this development standards that we already have? That's why I think this is so uncomfortable. We don't have a great model. So we're trying to figure out, going through growing pains of working that through ourselves.
I know you're not going to like this question, comment, but I think we do need to go through this process and look at different ways of organizing it. In which case, how useful is it to have a public draft that doesn't look like the final product?
Useful, actually. It's I get where you're heading, that the public review draft should get held off until it's reorganized. The content isn't necessarily changing.
No.
It's the structure of the content. So to get feedback on that content is important. We need the content. We need the feedback on the content, any modifications. The planning commission, as you recall, are going to have this great 2-day crash course in June. A revised public review draft will come out following those 2 days with the planning commission. And it's not uncommon to have some restructuring in a revised public review draft that eventually makes its way through hearing. So I think it's important that we do gather that feedback, and another version will be available for the public.
That was one of the reasons it was so important for us to really address the elements that are going to go in this, because if we can at least list the ingredients, maybe not how they'll all be assembled, if we can list the ingredients and the general flavor of those ingredients, we've got something that we can allow you all and the public to sink their teeth in and go, okay, we get a good enough idea. It might not be all the details, and maybe everybody's not going to be 100% comfortable, but if we can get people to substantial enough comfort level going, okay, so we're gonna express how a building has to be, articulated, where the windows and doors, entryways, and how the landscape needs to be treated in open space. All right, I got it. At least we're not giving away all of those different things we're not just throwing them up in the air and saying anything goes.
Will the draft have any degree of tables and graphics?
The draft will have tables and graphics.
Make sure you use that figure 2 from Sims.
Make it even better.
2 questions. One's a comment. I'll do that one first because it's easier. Anything that can be done, regardless of how you're going to structure the content, organize the content, I should say, anything that can be done to make the formatting more like Palm Desert and less like a 20-level outline. Because if we're talking about, especially for developers or anybody who's going to come in and they're reading through this document, I started to just stop noting what the actual section was, because I'd be like, oh, this is like 4 eyes.
Right.
And then I'd have to scroll up 3 pages to find the number, and then scroll up another 4 pages to find the letter. You know what I mean? Like I had to go back 20 pages sometimes to like find the first part to write down the whole string. So I think so if someone's asking, hey, I had a question about this, to find what to call it is really difficult.
Kind of California mandated structure, or is it just us that we have this 20 string thing?
It's just Word. Yeah, if there's any way to do it so it's not like that, I would say, let's try.
All going to be codified by your codifier. I think you use E-code or general code. So if you go on your online application now where it has all the linked cross references and that numbering, this is where all this is going to go. So that's why this pagination structure is the way that it is, because these are all going to be codified standards that will follow your existing format and structure of chapter, section, subsection, paragraph, subparagraph.
Because this all goes into the all municipal code.
Where I think we can provide that clarity, and something that we've talked about with city staff and some other communities do, is they create a checklist that an applicant would go through, where almost would be like the condensed version of all of this, where it's check boxes. And so you would see what the applicability of it is. I think but that's almost like it's like an implementation piece separate from the actual codified standards.
Okay.
I think when we look at some of these other outside source documents, when we're not having to stick with that rigid codification structure and cross-referencing, we have a little more freedom. I totally understand it though.
Okay.
I mean, code writing is, it's not intuitive. And the structures, I think it really comes back so that you can have a specific standard that you can go like section 17.020 BC says this. It provides that kind of level of specificity, but heard.
And the only, and part of that too is the entire development code right now is built on a format structure that this is dropped into. So if we deviate from that format and structure, it no longer is integratable. That's a word. I'm going to make it one if it's not. The integration doesn't fit. And so when we were talking about these different proposed ways, this would, in any of those ways, would get carved up in a completely different way, but we would need to still match that structure. What Michael's talking about checklist is what Commissioner Malakoff had talked about. Some communities have a condensed checklist version that's done at the counter. Typically staff would use that, the applicant would use that without having to look back at this. It's in a cleaner form that they can go, yes, I did, yes, I did, yes, I did, yes, I did, yes, and turn it in with an application.
But I understand the structure because I understand the numbering because that's the way our codes are written. But I guess my question would be, and maybe this solves itself with this reformatting, is that does it have to have so many subparagraphs? Is there a way to simplify those subparagraphs?
But it still would have, there may be some ways to simplify it, but it would still have that structure. Even in the revised or proposed version, that structure would still exist underneath each of those mixed use, commercial. It would still have that same.
To the degree that it is now, I guess that's the question. I mean, we understand the substructures, but it's almost like reading the MAP Act. And you gotta follow it, and then you gotta go back to up here, and I understand exactly what she's saying. So,
I'm like,
and I get that, because that's the structure, but is there a way to simplify? So that there's not so many sub-paragraphs,
Maybe
like condense in a way.
there,
Well, maybe if commercial becomes the top level and mixed use becomes the top level of whatever, then underneath it, if they're just the unique ones, they may not be as deep.
It might solve itself.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I want to say potentially.
but if you look at this structure is almost mimicked to what was on the board. I mean, the way that this is laid out now, it's just like Division 3. It is general standards, multifamily. It is
And
the
those
same
were
thing.
all equally difficult. I think, I honestly, they were just as difficult, which is why most of my notes that I send in, I didn't even bother with the numbering. Because I couldn't find what the actual numbering was.
So when we start to break, so that's kind of, that would be the downside to simplifying the structure of part 3 to this, where we have general, commercial, mixed use, because we're foregoing that level of detail that we have now in your part 3, where we have landscaping. And that is the chapter. Landscaping would now be housed in its own chapter. So it would be a section. And then all the other standards after that would be subsections and
Right.
paragraphs and subparagraphs. So I see a
So
benefit.
will actually be more complicated.
More complicated.
There's gonna be more levels.
Because
It'll be more level.
if you take the parking chapter now, parking is a chapter and then it has sections within it and then it goes down. When you condense that under general, you basically take all of those and you have to indent them.
They all drop down one level.
All of their standards
You have to
and-
indent them, but I think this gets back to, we'll need to play with that and see.
and I have good news. So once it gets codified, right? Codified on our E360, it doesn't look like that,
Correct.
right? We lose this entire format. You won't even see that all disappears.
Well, that's good to know. That would have saved us a lot.
That is true. Yeah, none of this, all of this will, the structure will stay the same.
There's so many sub.
Okay.
Yeah.
Structure will stay the same, but it will be codified into a more cohesive format that you're used to. This Word version is just so we can do track changes and give you a copy. But yeah, everything will go, this format is really just for public review and for you, just go into your
And you'll still have the breakdown of a section and an A and a B and an A B1 and a B2 and you'll still have that even through an e-codifier.
Yes.
You still will have it.
The benefit is that they're all going to be cross-referenced and cross-linked though.
Yes.
So if I were to click on like 8 it's gonna tell me
It would.
It will
what
take
the
you,
thing is.
It should take you to it through an e-codifier.
your codifier should be able to set up internal cross-references.
But just because it goes on an e-codifier doesn't mean it's losing structure. It's gonna have a structure.
Yeah.
The structures, otherwise you wouldn't be able to find anything. It's still gonna have a structure.
So my next question is, I know there was extensive discussion on this, in the steering committee meeting about whether or not this should be a standalone document or whether or not it should be incorporated into Division 3 and it sounded like during that meeting, that having it as a standalone document seemed like you guys were saying was more complicated. But this seems very complicated. So I'm just wondering, is this really less complicated than?
There's two schools of thought, and I'm gonna just say that there's no right or wrong. Two schools of thought. One is that you incorporate it in because it's part of your development standards, it's part of your design standards, it should be integrated and codified. The other school of thought is to have it be standalone and referenced out for editing purposes. So I know communities, Walnut Creek is one of them, that intentionally left their objective standards as a standalone document, kind of like a Palm Desert.
Adopted by resolution.
Adopted because they could edit and they can edit it more easily than having to go make zoning amendments process. And so, and Walnut Creek has updated theirs 5 times since its adoption, because every 12 months they do a review to make sure that, is this actually working with the development? Yeah. So there's two schools of thought. I think both routes work. It's really jurisdiction based. It just really is.
But I think,
it's part of the municipal code, it's gonna go to council.
Zone amendment.
It's a
We
zone.
go to council either way, but you know,
Well, that's the final place.
but no, well, one of the things you said, Chair, was that you just want it to be easy for the customer to find the information they need. And it needs to be easy for staff to have all the information in place. And I think what came up during the steering committee, because I think this question was asked, was that when you have a separate document, over time, it can tend to get lost. Or people come in and we're looking at the zoning code and it's like, oh, by the way, you gotta go look over here. And so when you have to go looking at different documents, I think that can kind of sometimes get a little bit challenging. So from a facilitative standpoint, I think it's easier to have it all in one document.
I think we're putting a lot of emphasis. I do want to make it easier to use, but the fact is, it's not an easy thing to do. And there's going to be multiple sections you're going to look at. It's just like CEQA is very complicated. And when you look up CEQA, the chapter that says what a notice of preparation is separate from what the mitigated negative declaration has, or what an EIR has to have, or what a notice of determination has to have. And you have to know to look in all those places, and you have to thumb through it to know where to look. So I think recently, before I worked for the Altum Group, when I first started working for the Altum Group, they sent me back to Redlands almost right away. And I was thankful that I went there because I knew the code. And I always thought, God, how would I ever work in another city that I didn't work in? And the first time I did it, I didn't let anybody know that I was a little panicked, but I was. And now I've worked in numerous cities. And I think that as you get familiar with these things, the person that you talked about that's just going to walk in, they're going to have to get used to how development works. But people do know, okay, when I go to a new code, I have to look at the table of contents and look at how they have it organized and know what sections I need to look at. And that's the first thing you're going to look at is the table of contents. Then okay, this is what I'm going to do first. Then I'm going to look at parking. Then I'm going to look at landscaping. Then I'm going to look at the lighting code. And there's not an easy way around it. We can debate all sorts of different types of methods, but I think the method that you had nearest to the left side of the second panel was probably the most organized one there was. Yeah, and
Down, and then I think we have one chapter at the very end of Division 3 called Objective Design Standards, and it's this chapter.
But Danielle, I'm Vice Chair Mead. I think one of the things that the average user or the casual user wouldn't think about is how the code will age. So one of the things that happens, like if you look at our code now, there's all sorts of contradictions in it now. And that's not unique to us. I can tell you that just about every city has a lot of contradictions in it, but we should strive to not have that. So when you have repetitive sections that repeat the same section, the same requirements, I think you're setting yourself up to have those inconsistencies. That's why I kind of liked what you said with the universal section that's going to be citywide. Then you're going to dive into different sections, different uses that will have their own sections that will go dive deeper. So it's kind of going to be like that org chart that I was talking about. So, but I don't think there's a way you can make it really, really simple. It's not a 2+2 thing.
It might be, after all this is said and done, a user guide, right? As was suggested. There's nothing that precludes us from not doing that. So we can always do something like that.
All right.
But development is hard for the casual person that comes in. It's unfair, but it really is.
Okay. Have we completed our discussion? Anything further? Consultant or for the staff? Thing on our end.
Did you get coherent answers out of us to go along with?
I wasn't expecting any coherent. All right.
We had a visitor.
Thank you for your input.
Okay, thank you. We have no members of the public present. Are there any public comments being submitted?
No, Chair, there were not.
Okay, thank you. This was for information and discussion only, so we need to take no further action. Moving on to item 5 on our agenda, Commissioner comments. And
3.
I'm going to start because I had some other comments, but I didn't want to mix them in with the ODS. I'm just have a personal concern that about some of the things that we discussed very early on. And I'm not sure, I hope we've built them in, but I'm not sure. And they are items like sufficient changes to allow live-work development, where we can have that mix of, you were talking about verticals. I mean, I'm imagining verticals where you have, you know, residential above commercial properties. Have we cleared the way for us to employ higher densities, better density bonuses, higher story limits for properties that will encourage affordable housing in particular? So those are just things that staff can tell me about later, but I just want them not to disappear, at least from my own thinking. However, that was all from me. Commissioner McPhail.
I guess sort of slightly piggybacking on what you just said. We're almost at the end of at least this draft part. What I don't have a great sense of so far, and I think it would be useful as we go out to do more with the public as well, is what have we, I know we've changed the format and we've tidied things up, but what are we actually changing, especially when it comes down to housing issues and the housing element? What are we doing to get our goals, our HCD goals met? Are we changing densities? Are we changing height? Where's that happening? How is our zoning changing to do that? I think it'd be useful for me and the public to see, well, this is what we have right now in terms of housing or parking or whatever topic you want. This is what we're changing. We will now allow 4-story buildings in zoning code, blah, blah, blah. And this is where it will happen. That I think we need to see what we have changed in some of these standards. Just that doesn't need to be great detail, but here are the headlines of what we're doing so that the public have a good sense. To hark back again to the Palm Springs example, the one workshop I went to when they were doing their zoning code, that's kind of how they opened the meeting. They showed, for example, right now we have 6 different types of residential zoning. Our proposal is to change it to 5, and this is what those new zonings will look like, and this is where they are. I think we need some sort of idea of what's changed.
No, he did it already. Vice
Well, I
Chair.
don't have anything to say until you talked, and now I think you made me think, which is, this is a tool, right? We are giving ourselves a new set of tools, and we're giving developers a new set of tools, but that does not, the tools themselves do not necessarily mean more development's going to happen. I mean, I remember thinking, we had one of the meetings where we were talking about the live work lofts and being able to, people maybe have a studio and they blow glass and they're in the industrial area and they live in the same place. And I was so excited about that. And then I was like, but someone has to build that, right? And unless someone does come in and build that, it's not going to happen. We still need to utilize these tools, and we still need to find ways to solve the issues, like how do we attract affordable housing if there's a budgeting issue and we don't, that's still an issue. The code can be as flexible as we want it to be, but that doesn't mean it's going to just all of a sudden there's going to be massive development. So, yeah.
Dovetailing on what you were asking, I just wanted to let you know that the density bonus law at the state level and what we've adopted allows what's called incentives. And the incentives are really variances, but I don't know why they won't call it that, but that's what they are. And that would allow for the things that you were talking about. So those things aren't forgotten. And I'd just like to thank the staff and our consultants for their patience in dealing with all our questions and concerns. And then I also like to just thank the commission because I think it's great that all of us, none of us are shrinking violets. And that we all have a distinct viewpoint. And I think that's really great. And that we're all looking for the best possible product. And this group is a very good group. And I did hear from somebody that came to our commission that complimented us on how well prepared we were, the one that at the meeting that they visited. So that was good to hear. So so we should all give kudos to ourselves also.
Okay. Item 6 on our agenda is city attorney comments.
No comments tonight. Thank you.
Item 7, staff comment.
Staff doesn't have any comments.
Well, I can add one.
You do have one comment?
I'll just add one comment. Since I haven't talked enough already tonight, we are expecting a summary of major changes in the code in the next few weeks. And just to add to that, staff will be taking comments, or I'm sorry, the summary changes and go to a series of one-on-ones with city council in the next couple of weeks. And that's in preparation for patient to the city council and on June. So just wanted to,
You could have a one-on-one with the city manager too.
yeah, city manager has a one-on-one with each city council member, and I will be person.
No, but will you have one with him also?
Yes,
Not-
we do briefings with the city manager.
Oh, yeah. We
Regularly.
do,
Come all
we
the
do
time.
briefings, but not
Yeah.
one.
All right. Thank you. In that case, I adjourn the meeting.